You need to stop running from the truth, Caleb. The woman's voice cut through the supermarket aisle like a knife through silence. Caleb Foster froze, his hand still gripping the shopping cart handle. He didn't know this elegant stranger standing before him in her tailored coat and knowing smile. But she knew him. She knew his daughter's name. She knew their schedule, their routines, their secrets. And worst of all, she knew about the night that destroyed everything. 3 years of carefully constructed walls were about to come crashing down, and Caleb had no idea that this chance encounter would either save his family or shatter what little remained of his broken heart. If you're ready to witness a story about loss, redemption, and the terrifying beauty of second chances, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The fluorescent lights of Morrison's grocery hummed their usual Saturday afternoon tune, casting that peculiar yellowish glow over rows of cereal boxes and canned vegetables. Caleb Foster navigated the produce section with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had made this exact trip every weekend for the past 3 years. Apples, bananas, the pre-cut carrots Maisie would actually eat. String cheese, chocolate milk, everything was routine. Everything was controlled. Everything was safe. That's how Caleb needed it to be. He was reaching for a bag of grapes when he felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of his neck that told him someone was watching. Caleb had learned to trust that instinct. In his line of work as a construction site supervisor, situational awareness kept you alive. But here, in the mundane sanctuary of weekend grocery shopping, it felt oddly out of place. He glanced up. A woman stood 3 feet away, studying him with an intensity that made his stomach tighten. She was probably in her early 40s, dressed in a charcoal wool coat that screamed money and taste. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple twist, and her face held the kind of composed beauty that came from good genetics and better self-discipline. But it was her eyes that held him, sharp, assessing, and filled with something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. "Caleb Foster," she said. Not a question. A statement. Caleb's hand froze on the grape bag. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "No?" The woman's smile was small, almost sad. "But I know you." Every instinct Caleb had spent 3 years honing screamed at him to walk away. Nothing good came from strangers who knew your name. Nothing good came from letting anyone pass the carefully maintained boundaries of his small, protected world. "I think you have me confused with someone else," he said, his voice flat, final. He turned back to his cart. "Maisie drew a sunflower in art class last Tuesday," the woman said quietly. Mrs. Patterson said it was the first time she'd volunteered to share her work with the class in over a year. Caleb's blood turned to ice water. He spun back around, his hand instinctively moving to his phone in his jacket pocket. "Who the hell are you? And why are you talking about my daughter?" The woman held up both hands in a placating gesture, but she didn't step back. "My name is Victoria Hale. I'm not here to frighten you, Caleb, I promise. But we need to talk, and this conversation is 3 years overdue." "I don't know you," Caleb said, but even as the words left his mouth, something nagged at the edge of his memory. The name. Victoria Hale. Where had he heard that name before? "No, you don't know me," Victoria agreed. "But I was there, Caleb. I was there the night your wife died." The grocery store seemed to tilt sideways. The fluorescent light suddenly felt too bright, the air too thin. Caleb gripped the shopping cart with both hands, his knuckles going white. "What did you just say?" Victoria's composed expression cracked, just slightly. "I was the hospital administrator on duty that night. March 15th, 3 years ago. I've thought about you and Maisie every day since." Caleb's mind reeled backward, dragging him through memories he'd spent years trying to bury. That night. The police at the door. The frantic drive to County General. The endless hallway that led to the room where his entire world ended. He remembered doctors, nurses, clipboards, machines that beeped and then fell silent. But faces? Specific people? It was all a blur of fluorescent lights and devastation. I don't remember you," he managed. "I know, you weren't supposed to. I was just the administrator handling the paperwork, making sure everything—" Victoria paused, choosing her words carefully, making sure everything was handled properly. "But I was in the room, Caleb, for the last few minutes. And your wife, Rebecca,
She asked me to make sure you got a message. The sound of Rebecca's name spoken aloud by this stranger felt like a physical blow. Caleb actually took a step backward, nearly knocking into a display of organic apples. "Don't," he said, his voice rough. "Don't you dare talk about her like you knew her."
I didn't know her," Victoria said, and there was a weight to her words that made Caleb look up. "I only had those final minutes. But sometimes, Caleb, minutes are enough. Sometimes they matter more than years." "Why are you here?" Caleb demanded. "Why now? Why in a goddamn grocery store?" Victoria glanced around, seeming to register for the first time that they were drawing curious looks from other shoppers. "This wasn't how I planned this conversation."
"I've been trying to find the right moment for weeks." "Weeks? You've been—" Caleb felt anger surge through him, hot and defensive. "You've been following me?" "No, not following. I moved back to town 2 months ago. I'm overseeing the Hale Foundation's new education initiative partnership with Riverside Elementary, your daughter's school." Riverside Elementary, where Maisie sat in 3rd grade, quiet and careful, drawing her pictures and keeping her feelings locked down tight, just like her father. "This is insane," Caleb muttered, running a hand through his hair. I need you to stay away from my daughter." "I'm not trying to hurt her, Caleb, or you. I'm trying to keep a promise." Victoria reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a business card. She held it out, but when Caleb didn't take it, she set it carefully in his shopping cart instead. "When you're ready to hear what your wife wanted you to know, call me, please." She turned to walk away. "Wait," Caleb heard himself say, even though every rational part of his brain was screaming at him to let her go. What kind of message?" Victoria looked back over her shoulder. In the harsh grocery store lighting, Caleb could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight of whatever secret she'd been carrying. "The kind that might change everything," she said softly. "If you let it." Then she walked away, her heels clicking against the scuffed linoleum, leaving Caleb standing alone in the produce section with a cart full of carefully chosen groceries and a business card he was afraid to touch. 20 minutes later, Caleb sat in his truck in the grocery store parking lot, the engine running, but the vehicle still in park. The bags were loaded in the back. The chocolate milk was getting warm, and he couldn't stop staring at the business card sitting on his dashboard. Victoria Hale, Chief Executive Officer, Hale Foundation for Educational Excellence. The number was printed below in crisp, professional font. All he had to do was call. Or he could throw the card away and pretend this encounter never happened. Go back to the safe, controlled routine that had kept him and Maisie functioning for 3 years. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who watched Maisie on Saturday mornings while Caleb ran errands. "She's been asking for you. Drawing again. Come home when you can." Drawing. Like she'd done on Tuesday, according to Victoria. A sunflower. Before the accident, Rebecca had kept sunflowers in the kitchen year-round. She'd said they reminded her that even in the darkest seasons, beauty could still grow toward the light. After she died, Caleb had removed every trace of them. Too painful. Too much of a reminder. But Maisie had started drawing them again. Caleb put the truck in gear and drove home, the business card still sitting on the dashboard, catching the late afternoon sunlight like an accusation. Home was a small 2-bedroom bungalow on Maple Street. Nothing fancy, but well-maintained. Caleb had bought it 8 years ago, back when Rebecca was pregnant, and they'd been building a future together. Now it felt too big and too empty all at once. He pulled into the driveway and grabbed the grocery bags, nodding his thanks to Mrs. Chen as she slipped out the front door with a knowing smile. She never asked questions about his Saturday errands taking longer than they should. She was good that way. "Daddy!" Maisie appeared in the doorway, all wild brown curls and gap-toothed grin. 8 years old and already showing signs of becoming the spitting image of her mother. It hurt to look at her sometimes, but Caleb had learned to hide that pain behind smiles and normalcy. "Hey, Bug," he said, hoisting the bags. "Help me put these away?" "Can I have the chocolate milk first?" "After lunch." "But Daddy." "After lunch, Maisie." She huffed, but followed him into the kitchen, her bare feet padding against the hardwood floors. Caleb set about unpacking groceries, falling into the familiar rhythm of domestic routine. Maisie chattered about her morning. Mrs. Chen had let her watch cartoons, she'd played with the neighbor's cat through the fence, she'd finished another drawing. "Can I show you?" she asked, tugging on his sleeve. "Sure, Bug. Let me just finish. Please? It's important." Something in her voice made Caleb stop. He set down the bag of apples and turned to give her his full attention. "Okay, show me." Maisie ran to the living room and returned with a piece of construction paper clutched in both hands. She held it up proudly. Caleb's breath caught. It was a sunflower. Bright yellow petals rendered in careful crayon strokes, a dark brown center, a green stem planted firmly in brown earth. In the corner, in Maisie's careful printing. "For Mommy." "It's beautiful," Caleb managed, his throat tight. "Really beautiful, Maisie." "Mrs. Patterson says I'm really good at art," Maisie said, and there was a light in her eyes Caleb hadn't seen in months. "She says the school might get more art supplies soon because of a foundation grant thing. I don't know what that means, but she seemed happy about it." Foundation grant. Hale Foundation. Victoria Hale. Caleb felt the walls of his carefully constructed world beginning to crack. "That's great, Bug," he said, forcing lightness into his voice. "I'm proud of you." Maisie beamed and ran off to tape the drawing to her bedroom wall, where it would join the dozens of others she'd accumulated over the years. Most of them were careful, controlled, trees and houses and abstract shapes. But this sunflower was different. It was alive, vibrant, full of a joy that terrified Caleb because he knew how easily joy could be ripped away. He finished putting away the groceries on autopilot, his mind churning through the encounter at Morrison's. Victoria Hale claimed she had a message from Rebecca, a message that had waited 3 years. What could possibly be so important that a hospital administrator would track him down years later to deliver it? And more pressingly, did he want to know? The safe answer was no. The smart answer was to throw away that business card and keep his head down. Knowing changed things. And Caleb had built a life on keeping things exactly the same. But as he listened to Maisie singing to herself in her bedroom, something Rebecca used to do, he wondered if the same was really working anymore. Monday morning arrived with its usual chaos. Caleb woke Maisie at 6:30, navigated the breakfast negotiations, yes to waffles, no to the ones with chocolate chips on a school day, supervised teeth brushing, and managed to get them both out the door by 7:45. The drive to Riverside Elementary was exactly 14 minutes in normal traffic. Caleb knew because he'd timed it. He knew every traffic light, every stop sign, every potential hazard on the route. Control meant safety. Routine meant survival. "Are you staying for drop-off?" Maisie asked as they pulled into the school parking lot. "Just at the curb, Bug. I've got to get to the site." Disappointment flickered across her face, but she hid it quickly, too quickly. 8-year-olds shouldn't be that good at hiding disappointment. "Okay," she said, gathering her backpack. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you too. Have a good day." He watched her walk through the main entrance, waiting until she disappeared inside before pulling away. It was what he did every day. Drop off at 8, pick up at 3:15. Never late, never varying the routine. But today, as he drove past the school entrance, he noticed something new. A banner hanging over the main doorway. Riverside Elementary. Welcomes the Hale Foundation. Building. Brighter futures together. Caleb's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The construction site was in full swing by the time Caleb arrived. A new medical complex going up on the north side of town. He threw himself into the work with his usual intensity, checking measurements, coordinating with subcontractors, solving the 1,000 small problems that cropped up on any given day. But his mind kept drifting back to that banner, to Victoria Hale Sheck, to the message she claimed to carry. "Boss, you okay?" Tony, his lead carpenter, called out around 11. "You've checked that same wall frame 3 times. Caleb blinked, realizing Tony was right. "Yeah, sorry, just distracted." "Woman trouble?" Tony grinned. "About time, if you ask me." "Nobody asked you," Caleb replied, but there was no heat in it. Tony had worked for him for 5 years and earned the right to occasional ribbing. "Seriously, though, you've been off all morning. Everything all right?" Caleb considered telling him about Victoria Hale, about the strange encounter in the grocery store, about the growing sense that his carefully ordered life was about to be upended whether he liked it or not. Instead, he said, "Everything's fine. Let's get back to work." but everything wasn't fine. And by lunchtime, sitting in his truck with a sandwich he couldn't taste, Caleb finally admitted to himself what he'd known since Saturday. He was going to call Victoria Hale. He needed to know what Rebecca had said in those final minutes. He needed to understand why a stranger had carried a message for 3 years. He pulled out his phone and the business card he'd tucked into his wallet, hating himself a little for not throwing it away like he should have. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Victoria Hale. It's Caleb Foster." A pause. Then, quietly, "I'm glad you called. I need to know what she said, what message you've been carrying." "Not over the phone," Victoria said firmly. "This conversation deserves to happen face to face. Are you free this evening?" Every instinct screamed at him to say no, to hang up, to go back to his safe, controlled routine. 6 o'clock, he heard himself say. "There's a coffee shop on Main Street, Brewster's. I know it. I'll be there." She hung up before he could change his mind. Caleb sat in his truck, staring at his phone, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. Around him, the construction site hummed with activity, hammers and saws, and the shouts of men building something new from concrete and steel. Building something new. The phrase echoed in his mind for the rest of the afternoon. Brewster's Coffee House was nearly empty when Caleb arrived at 5:58. He ordered a black coffee he didn't want and claimed a corner booth with a clear view of the door, old habits from his brief stint in the Army 20 years ago. Always know your exits. Always see what's coming. Victoria walked in at exactly 6 o'clock, punctual to the minute. She'd traded Saturday's elegant coat for a more casual navy sweater and jeans, but she carried herself with the same composed confidence. She spotted him immediately, ordered something at the counter, then made her way to his booth. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Caleb said. His voice came out harder than he'd intended, but he didn't apologize. "You said you had a message from my wife. I'm here to receive it." Victoria studied him for a moment, and Caleb had the uncomfortable feeling of being assessed, measured, and found somehow lacking. 3 years ago, she began, I was the assistant hospital administrator at County General. It was my job to handle the administrative side of trauma cases, paperwork, family notifications, coordinating with the medical staff. The night your wife was brought in, I was the one who processed her admission. Caleb's jaw clenched. "I remember that night. I don't need you to recap it. I know you don't, but you need to understand the context. Your wife was conscious for the first 20 minutes after arrival. The medical team was doing everything they could, but the internal injuries were extensive. They knew the prognosis. I knew the prognosis, and Rebecca knew it too." "Don't," Caleb said sharply. "Don't say her name like you knew her." "You're right, I didn't know her. But in those final minutes, while the medical team was preparing to move her to surgery they knew wouldn't help, Rebecca called me over to her bedside."
She knew she was dying, Caleb. She knew she wouldn't make it through the night, and she knew you weren't there yet. Caleb's hands curled into fists on the table. He'd been 20 minutes away, 20 minutes stuck in traffic, his phone buzzing with calls he couldn't answer while driving, 20 minutes too late to say goodbye. "She asked me to make sure you got a message," Victoria continued, her voice steady but gentle. "She made me promise, actually made me physically promise, grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go, that I would find you someday and tell you what she needed you to hear." "So tell me," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what was so important that you've spent 3 years tracking me down?" Victoria met his eyes, and in that moment, Caleb saw something shift in her expression. Whatever armor she wore as a CEO, whatever professional distance she maintained, it cracked enough for him to see the human being underneath, someone who had carried weight for far too long. She said, "Tell Caleb that I need him to promise me something. Promise me that Maisie will not grow up in silence. Promise me that love will not disappear from our home just because I did. Promise me he'll find a way to let light back in." The words hit Caleb like a physical force. He felt his chest constrict, his breath catch, his carefully maintained composure threatening to shatter. "She said all that?" he managed. "Word for word. I wrote it down that night because I knew I couldn't trust myself to remember it perfectly. And I've read those words at least once a week for 3 years, wondering how to find you, wondering if I even should." "Then why did you?" Caleb demanded. "Why not just let it go? I was managing, we were surviving. We had a routine, a life that worked. Why come back now? And because you weren't living, Victoria interrupted, and there was steel in her voice now. You were surviving, yes, but that's not what Rebecca asked for. She didn't ask you to survive. She asked you to let light back in. You have no right to judge how I've raised my daughter, Caleb said, anger flaring hot and defensive. You're right, I don't. But I've watched Maisie at school events over the past 2 months, Caleb. I've seen a bright, talented little girl who's learned to make herself small, who's learned to keep her joy quiet because she's afraid it might hurt the one person she has left. That's not living. That's not what Rebecca wanted for either of you. Caleb stood up abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. Several other patrons looked over, but he didn't care. This was a mistake, he said. You don't know anything about us. You don't know what we've been through. You're right. I only know what Rebecca told me in those final minutes. But sometimes, Caleb, the people who are dying see things more clearly than the people who are left behind. Caleb wanted to storm out, wanted to leave the stranger and her unwanted message behind. But something kept his feet planted to the floor. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Nothing, Victoria said, and she sounded tired. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to keep my promise to a dying woman. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. She stood, gathering her coat and purse. Wait, Caleb said. The foundation. At Maisie's school. Is that why you're really here? Victoria paused. The Hale Foundation partnership with Riverside Elementary was already in the works before I knew you lived in this district. But when I found out, yes, I volunteered to oversee it personally. I wanted to see how Maisie was doing, to see if she needed anything. The arts program funding was already approved, but I made sure it was prioritized when I saw how much she lit up during art class. So you've been watching my daughter. I've been making sure she has opportunities, Victoria corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Victoria's expression softened. I lost someone I loved to a car accident too, Caleb. A long time ago. My younger sister. I was 17, she was 15. And I spent years afterward going through the motions, surviving instead of living, until someone finally told me that the people we lose don't want us to stop living. They want us to live harder, love deeper, hold on tighter to what matters. Caleb felt something crack inside his chest. How long did it take before you could do that? Too long, Victoria admitted. Years longer than it should have. And I've spent every day since trying to help other people not make the same mistake. She pulled out another business card and set it on the table. My personal cell is on the back. If you ever want to talk about Rebecca, about Maisie, about anything, call me. Or don't. But know that I'm here if you need me. This time, when she turned to leave, Caleb didn't stop her. He stood alone in the coffee shop, staring at the business card, Rebecca's message echoing in his mind. Promise me that love will not disappear from our home just because I did. Caleb picked Maisie up from after-school care at 6:30, later than usual. She was the last kid waiting, sitting on the steps with her backpack and a book, and the guilt hit him immediately. Sorry I'm late, Bug, he said, ruffling her hair. It's okay. Mrs. Henderson let me read in the library. She held up her book, something about a girl who could talk to animals. Can we stop for dinner? I'm really hungry. They usually ate at home. Routine, schedule, control. Sure, Caleb heard himself say. How about Rosie's Diner? Maisie's eyes widened. Really? On a Monday? Why not? Her answering smile was so bright it hurt. Okay. Rosie's Diner was a local institution. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and a menu that hadn't changed since 1987. Rebecca had loved it. They'd come here on their first date, and periodically throughout their marriage when life got too serious and they needed to remember how to be silly together. Caleb hadn't been back since the funeral. But now, sliding into a booth across from his daughter, watching her study the menu with exaggerated seriousness, even though she always ordered the same thing, he wondered why he'd stayed away. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it reminded him of what he'd lost. But it also reminded him of what he'd had. Pancakes for dinner? Maisie asked hopefully. If that's what you want. With extra whipped cream? Don't push it. She giggled, and the sound was so pure, so unguarded, that Caleb felt his throat tighten. Promise me that Maisie will not grow up in silence. They ordered,
pancakes for Maisie, a burger for Caleb that he probably wouldn't finish. While they waited, Maisie chattered about her day. Art class was her favorite now. Mrs. Patterson was teaching them about famous painters. Maisie wanted to learn about the person who painted sunflowers. Van Gogh, Caleb said. Vincent van Gogh. Your mom loved his work. Maisie's face went very still. They rarely talked about Rebecca, not directly. It was an unspoken rule in their house. Her memory was preserved in photos and careful silence, never in conversation. Did she really? Maisie asked quietly. Yeah, we went to an art museum once before you were born and spent an hour in front of one of his paintings. She said something about how he painted things the way they felt, not just the way they looked. That's cool, Maisie said. Then, even more quietly, I miss her. Caleb's breath caught. I know, Bug. I miss her too. Do you think she'd like my drawings? I think she'd love them. I think she'd be incredibly proud of you. Maisie's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she was smiling. Can we talk about her more? Sometimes I forget things, and I don't want to forget. Promise me that love will not disappear from our home just because I did. Yeah, Caleb said, his own voice rough with emotion. Yeah, we can talk about her more. Their food arrived, and they ate while Maisie asked questions. What was Mom's favorite color? What did she like to eat? Did she like pancakes for dinner too? Caleb answered each one, and with every memory shared, he felt something loosening in his chest, something that had been wound tight for 3 years. It hurt, but it also felt like breathing for the first time in a long while. They drove home through the quiet streets, and Caleb listened to Maisie hum to herself in the back seat. When they got home, she didn't run straight to her room like usual. Instead, she hovered in the kitchen while Caleb cleaned up. Daddy? Yeah, Bug? Today was a good day. Yeah? Yeah, can we have more days like this? Caleb looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw Rebecca's eyes staring back at him, bright, hopeful, waiting for him to choose life or survival. Yeah, he said, we can have more days like this. That night, after Maisie was asleep, Caleb sat in the living room with a beer he wasn't drinking and Victoria Hale's business card in his hand. He thought about Rebecca's message, about the promise she'd asked him to make, about the life he'd built on routine and control and carefully managed emotions. He thought about Maisie's smile at Rosie's diner, about the way she'd asked to talk about her mother more, about the sunflower drawing taped to her bedroom wall. And he thought about Victoria Hale, a stranger who'd carried a message for 3 years, who'd funded an arts program, who'd seen something in his daughter that maybe he'd been too afraid to see himself. Promise me he'll find a way to let light back in. Caleb picked up his phone and typed out a text to the number on the back of the card before he could overthink it. You were right. I haven't been living. I don't know how to change that, but I think I need to try. Thank you for keeping your promise. He hit send before he could delete it. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed with a response. That's all Rebecca asked for, that you try. The rest will come one day at a time, and you don't have to do it alone. Caleb stared at the message for a long time. Then he turned off his phone, finished his beer, and went to bed. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't dream about the night Rebecca died. He dreamed about sunflowers instead. The next few weeks passed in a strange kind of limbo. Caleb didn't call Victoria, but he didn't block her number either. He existed in the space between his old life and whatever came next, trying to figure out how to keep the promise Rebecca had asked of him. He started small. Tuesday morning, instead of the usual rushed breakfast, he made French toast, Rebecca's recipe, the one with cinnamon and vanilla. Maisie's face lit up when she saw it. Special occasion? She asked. Nope, just Tuesday. On Thursday, he arrived at school pickup 15 minutes early and actually got out of the truck. He stood with the other parents by the fence, making awkward small talk about the weather and upcoming school events. It felt foreign and uncomfortable, but he did it anyway. Friday evening, he let Maisie pick the movie for family night, some animated thing about feelings being colorful characters inside a kid's head. They made popcorn and sprawled on the couch, and when Maisie fell asleep against his shoulder halfway through, Caleb didn't move her. He just sat there, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling the weight of her trust. Saturday morning brought another grocery run, and Caleb found himself walking past the produce section where he'd first encountered Victoria Hale. No elegant strangers appeared this time,
just him and his cart in the normal rhythm of weekend errands. But as he reached for the grapes, he paused. Then, almost on impulse, he grabbed a bouquet of sunflowers from the floral section. Mrs. Chen raised her eyebrows when she saw them later, after he'd returned home. "Those are lovely," she said carefully. "Yeah," Caleb agreed, not offering explanation. He put them in a vase on the kitchen table. Maisie squealed with delight when she saw them. "Just like the ones I drew," she exclaimed. "Just like them," Caleb confirmed. It was a small thing, one bouquet of flowers, but it felt monumental, a tiny crack in the walls he'd built, letting light seep through. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Caleb's coffee shop conversation with Victoria. He was reviewing blueprints when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Caleb Foster. "Mr. Foster, this is Principal Matthews from Riverside Elementary. I'm calling about the art showcase we're hosting next month. Maisie's art teacher submitted several of her sunflower pieces for display, and we'd love to feature them prominently. We'll need parental consent, of course, and we're hoping you might be able to attend the opening reception." Caleb's mind raced. Art showcase? Yes, it's part of the Hale Foundation's partnership program. They're sponsoring a district-wide student art exhibition. Quite a big event, actually. Several local businesses are participating, and there will be media coverage. We think it's a wonderful opportunity for our students. Of course, Victoria was behind this. "When is it?" Caleb asked. "The opening reception is Friday, November 10th at 6 p.m. The exhibition will run for 2 weeks after that. 2 weeks until the showcase. 2 weeks to decide if he was ready to let his daughter's joy be public, to step outside the protected bubble of their quiet life. "Mr. Foster, should I put you down as attending? Promise me he'll find a way to let light back in." "Yes," Caleb said. "Put me down for 2. I'll be bringing my daughter, Chat." That evening, Caleb told Maisie about the showcase over dinner. "They want to display your sunflowers?" she asked, her eyes huge. "Multiple pieces, apparently. Principal Matthews seemed pretty excited about it." Maisie bit her lip, a gesture that was pure Rebecca. "Will lots of people see them?" "Probably. Does that scare you?" She considered this seriously. "A little, but also it makes me feel proud. Is that okay?" "Being proud is always okay, Bug. Your art is beautiful. You should be proud." "Will you really come to the opening thing?" "I promised, didn't I?" Maisie grinned and went back to her spaghetti, chattering about which pieces she hoped they'd choose. Caleb watched her, marveling at the change in his daughter over the past few weeks. She was brighter somehow, more animated, more herself. Later, after Maisie was in bed, Caleb found himself pulling out his phone and staring at Victoria's number. He'd kept their text conversation, her reassurance that he didn't have to do this alone, but hadn't reached out again. Before he could overthink it, he typed a message. "The Arts Showcase." "That was you, wasn't it?" The response came quickly. "The showcase was already planned. But yes, I made sure Maisie's work was given proper consideration. She's incredibly talented. Why are you doing this?" "Because I made a promise. And because sometimes people need someone to believe in them before they can believe in themselves." Caleb stared at the screen, unsure how to respond to that. "Thank you," he finally typed, "for seeing her, for seeing what I was too scared to see. You're seeing it now. That's what matters." Then, after a pause, another message appeared. "I'll be at the showcase. If you want company that evening, find me. If you don't, I'll keep my distance. Either way, I'm glad you're going." Caleb read the message 3 times, trying to parse the emotions it stirred up. Gratitude, fear, something that might have been hope. He didn't respond, but he saved the conversation instead of deleting it. Progress, he supposed. Small and terrifying, but progress nonetheless. The 2 weeks until the showcase passed in a blur of work and small revelations. Caleb found himself noticing things he'd trained himself not to see. The way Maisie hummed while doing homework, just like Rebecca used to. The way she organized her art supplies with meticulous care. The way she asked questions about her mother more frequently now that Caleb had opened that door. One evening, she asked to see old photo albums. They sat together on the living room floor, turning pages of a life that felt both distant and achingly close. Rebecca at 25, pregnant and glowing. Rebecca and Caleb on their wedding day.
Rebecca holding newborn Maisie with an expression of pure wonder. "She was so pretty," Maisie whispered. "She was beautiful," Caleb agreed. "Inside and out." "Do I look like her?" "More every day." Maisie studied a photo of Rebecca laughing at some long-forgotten joke, her whole face lit with joy. "I want to be like her," Maisie said. "Happy like that." Caleb's throat tightened. "You can be, Bug. You are. But sometimes I feel like being happy means forgetting her. Like if I'm too happy, it means I don't miss her enough." The word struck Caleb like a hammer to the chest because he'd felt exactly the same way. He'd worn his grief like armor, believing that moving forward meant leaving Rebecca behind. "Your mom wouldn't want that," he said, pulling Maisie close. "She'd want you to be happy. She'd want both of us to be happy. Being happy doesn't mean we love her less or miss her less. It just means we're living the way she'd want us to live." "How do you know?" Caleb thought about Victoria's message, about Rebecca's final words. "Because your mom told me," he said softly. "Before she died, she made me promise that we wouldn't stop living, that we'd let love and light back into our home. I forgot that promise for a while, but I'm trying to remember it now." Maisie looked up at him with those solemn brown eyes. "I'm glad you're remembering." "Me too, Bug. Me too." They spent another hour with the photo albums, and for the first time the memories didn't feel like they were drowning Caleb. They felt like something he could hold on to and still move forward with, like anchors that could also be wings. The night before the arts showcase, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Wondering if he was ready for this, for putting Maisie's joy on display, for stepping into a public event, for potentially seeing Victoria Hale face to face in a crowded room. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from an unknown number that revealed itself to be Principal Matthews. "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow evening, Mr. Foster. Maisie's pieces are stunning. You should be very proud." Caleb typed back a quick "thank you," then set the phone aside. Sleep wouldn't come, so he got up and wandered to Maisie's room. She was fast asleep, curled around her stuffed elephant, her face peaceful in the glow of her nightlight. On the wall above her bed, dozens of drawings created a patchwork gallery, sunflowers and trees and abstract swirls of color. Each one a small rebellion against the silence he'd tried to enforce. Each one a piece of light forcing its way through the cracks. Caleb stood there for a long time, just watching his daughter sleep and breathing through the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. Tomorrow he would step back into the world. Tomorrow he would let people see the beautiful things his daughter created. Tomorrow he would take one more step toward keeping the promise Rebecca had asked of him. "Promise me that love will not disappear from our home just because I did." "I'm trying, Beck," he whispered into the quiet darkness. "I'm really trying." In her sleep, Maisie smiled, and Caleb went back to bed, still afraid, still uncertain, but no longer completely alone. Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp November air that smelled like wood smoke and possibility. Caleb stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his collar for the third time and feeling ridiculous about it. It was just a school art showcase. He'd been to parent-teacher conferences before, school plays, field day events. This shouldn't feel different, but it did. "Daddy, are you almost ready?" Maisie called from her room. "We're going to be late." Caleb checked his watch. 5:30. They had plenty of time to make the 6 o'clock reception, but Maisie had been vibrating with nervous excitement since the moment she'd gotten home from school. She'd changed outfits 4 times before settling on her favorite purple dress, the one Rebecca had bought her 2 Christmases ago that she'd since grown into. 2 minutes, Bug, he called back. He gave himself one final look in the mirror. Khakis, button-down shirt, the blazer he saved for rare occasions. He looked like a person who had his life together, which felt like the most elaborate lie he'd told in years. But he was trying. That had to count for something. Maisie appeared in the bathroom doorway, practically bouncing on her toes. Her hair was pulled back with a sunflower clip. When had she gotten that? And her eyes sparkled with anticipation. "You look beautiful, Bug," Caleb said. "You look nice too, Daddy. Very fancy." "Well, it's a fancy event." "Are you nervous?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "A little. Are you?" Super nervous, but also excited. Is that weird? Not weird at all. I think that's exactly how you're supposed to feel. They drove to Riverside Elementary through the gathering dusk, and Caleb tried to ignore the way his hands tightened on the steering wheel as they got closer. The school parking lot was already half full when they arrived, cars streaming in for the showcase. Through the gymnasium windows, Caleb could see warm lights and movement, a crowd forming, people gathering. His instinct was to turn around, to protect Maisie from disappointment, to protect himself from whatever emotions this evening might dredge up. But he'd made a promise. Several promises, actually. "Ready?" he asked, unbuckling his seatbelt. Maisie nodded, her earlier excitement tempered now by visible nerves. "What if nobody likes my drawings?" "Impossible. Your drawings are incredible." "But what if—" "Maisie," Caleb turned to face her fully. "Your mom used to say that art wasn't about whether people liked it. It was about whether it was true to what you felt. And your sunflowers, they're true. That's all that matters." She considered this, then gave him a small, brave smile. "Okay, let's go." They walked across the parking lot together, Maisie's small hand tucked into his larger one. The evening air carried sounds of conversation and laughter from inside the building, and Caleb felt his shoulders tense with each step closer. The gymnasium had been transformed. Gone were the basketball hoops and floor markings. In their place stood elegant display panels arranged in careful rows, each one showcasing student artwork under professional lighting. Tables draped in white cloth held refreshments, cookies, punch, coffee. Adults mingled in clusters while children darted between displays, pointing and exclaiming over their friends' work. It was beautiful and overwhelming. "Mr. Foster, Maisie!" Principal Matthews appeared through the crowd, her face bright with welcome. "I'm so glad you could make it. Maisie, your pieces are displayed in the featured student section. Would you like to see?" Maisie looked up at Caleb, seeking permission. He nodded, and she followed Principal Matthews deeper into the maze of displays, leaving Caleb standing alone near the entrance. He should follow them, should see Maisie's work in all its public glory. But his feet wouldn't move. The crowd felt too dense, the noise too loud, the whole evening too much like stepping back into a version of himself he'd locked away 3 years ago. "You look like you're about to bolt." The voice came from his left. Caleb turned to find Victoria Hale standing a few feet away, holding a glass of punch and regarding him with an expression that was equal parts amusement and understanding. She looked different than she had in the grocery store or the coffee shop. Tonight she wore a deep green dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, her hair down in loose waves. She looked softer somehow, more approachable. "I'm fine," Caleb said automatically. Liar. But there was no judgment in her tone. "Big crowds aren't your thing, I'm guessing." "Not particularly." "Mine either. I'm much better at boardroom presentations than cocktail party small talk." She took a sip of her punch, then grimaced. "Though apparently I'm better at both than drinking overly sweet fruit punch." Despite himself, Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Pretty bad?" "Aggressively bad. I think it's 90% sugar, 10% red dye." She set the cup down on a nearby table. "Have you seen Maisie's display yet?" "Not yet. Principal Matthews just took her to see it." "Then let me show you. Come on." Victoria started walking, and Caleb found himself following before he'd consciously decided to move. She navigated through the crowd with practiced ease, offering polite smiles and brief greetings to people who tried to engage her, but never stopping long enough to get trapped in conversation. "You're good at that," Caleb observed. "At what?" "Moving through a crowd without actually having to interact with it." Victoria glanced back at him with a knowing smile. "Years of practice. When you run a foundation, everyone wants 5 minutes of your time. You learn to be polite but efficient, or you never make it across a room." They reached the featured student section, and Caleb stopped breathing. Maisie's sunflowers were displayed on 3 connected panels, each piece professionally mounted and lit. But it wasn't just the quality of the presentation that struck him. It was the artwork itself. He'd seen these drawings at home, tacked to Maisie's bedroom wall, or left on the kitchen table. But here, in this context, under proper lighting and given the attention they deserved, they were revelatory. The first was the original sunflower she'd drawn weeks ago, the one she'd dedicated to her mother. The yellow petals seemed to glow with an inner light, and the careful detail in the center showed a precision Caleb hadn't fully appreciated before. The second was newer, a whole field of sunflowers stretching toward an impossibly blue sky. The perspective was ambitious for an 8-year-old, and while it wasn't technically perfect, it radiated joy. The third took Caleb's breath away. It was a portrait, rendered in colored pencil with careful, loving detail. A woman with Rebecca's smile, sunflowers woven into her hair, her eyes closed as if she were breathing in summer air. Below it, in Maisie's careful printing, "My mom's garden." "She's extraordinarily talented," Victoria said quietly beside him. "Mrs. Patterson says she's never seen a student with such natural understanding of light and composition." Caleb couldn't speak. His throat had closed up completely. He just stood there, staring at his daughter's artwork, seeing Rebecca in every line and color choice. "There you are." Maisie appeared at his elbow, Principal Matthews trailing behind. "Do you see them, Daddy? They're right in the front section. Mrs. Patterson says lots of people have already asked about them." "They're beautiful, Bug," Caleb managed, his voice rough. "Really, really beautiful." Maisie beamed, then noticed Victoria standing nearby. "Oh, hi." "Hello, Maisie," Victoria said warmly. "I've been admiring your work. These sunflowers are stunning." "Thank you." "Do you work with the foundation?" Principal Matthews said the foundation helped pay for all the art supplies. "I do work with the foundation. In fact, I help run it." Maisie's eyes went wide. "Really? That's so cool. Thank you for helping my school. Art class is my favorite now." "I can see why. You have a real gift." A woman Caleb didn't recognize approached their group, smiling broadly. "Excuse me, are you Maisie Foster? I'm Jennifer Hartley from the Lakewood Gazette. We're doing a feature on the showcase, and your sunflower series has been generating quite a buzz. Would you and your father be willing to answer a few questions?" Caleb's immediate instinct was to say no, to pull Maisie away from the reporter and the attention, and anything that might put them in the public eye. But before he could speak, he caught Victoria's gaze. She wasn't pushing, wasn't prompting, just watching him steadily, as if to say, "This is your choice. Choose wisely." "Can we, Daddy?" Maisie asked, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. "Please." "Promise me that Maisie will not grow up in silence." "Sure," Caleb heard himself say. "We can do that." The interview was brief. Just a few questions about Maisie's inspiration, her favorite subjects to draw, how she'd discovered her love of art. Maisie answered with the unself-conscious honesty of childhood, explaining that she liked sunflowers because her mom had liked them, and that drawing made her feel close to memories she was afraid of losing. The reporter's expression softened. "And how do you feel about having your work displayed here tonight?" "Proud," Maisie said, "and a little scared, but my dad says it's okay to feel both things at once." Jennifer Hartley looked at Caleb with something like approval. "Your dad sounds very wise." After the reporter left, Principal Matthews whisked Maisie away to meet another student artist, leaving Caleb and Victoria standing together near the sunflower display. "You did well," Victoria said. "I barely said anything." Exactly. You let Maisie shine. That's what good parents do." Caleb shoved his hands in his pockets, uncomfortable with the praise. "I almost said no to the interview." "But you didn't. That's what matters." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the crowd move through the exhibition. Caleb saw Maisie across the room, laughing with a group of her classmates, her face flushed with excitement. "She looks happy," Victoria observed. "Yeah, she does." "And that terrifies you." It wasn't a question. Caleb glanced at Victoria, finding her watching him with that same assessing gaze she'd worn in the grocery store, like she could see straight through all his carefully constructed defenses. "Happiness feels temporary," he admitted, "like something that can be taken away at any second." "It can be," Victoria said bluntly. "That's the risk of being alive. But living in fear of loss isn't really living at all. It's just existing in the shadow of the worst thing that ever happened to you." "Speaking from experience?" "Always." Victoria turned to face him fully. "After my sister died, I spent years being angry at the world. Angry that she was gone. Angry that life kept moving forward without her. Angry that other people got to be happy when I felt like I was drowning. It took a long time to realize that being angry was easier than being sad. and being sad was easier than doing the hard work of healing. What changed? Caleb asked. Someone told me the truth I needed to hear, that my sister wouldn't want me to spend my life being bitter, that the best way to honor her memory was to live fully, love deeply, and find moments of joy wherever I could. It sounds simple, but it took years before I could actually do it. And now you go around delivering that same message to other people? Victoria smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I go around keeping promises, which sometimes means delivering hard truths. Speaking of which, she hesitated, as if weighing her next words carefully. There's something else Rebecca asked me to tell you, something I didn't mention at the coffee shop because you weren't ready to hear it. Caleb's stomach tightened. What? Not here. Not now. But soon, when you're ready. Victoria glanced around the crowded gymnasium. Tonight is about Maisie. Let her have this. Before Caleb could press further, Maisie came running back, pulling a boy about her age by the hand. Daddy, this is Marcus. He drew the dragon over there. She pointed to a nearby display featuring an impressively detailed dragon in flight. We're going to be art partners for the next project. Caleb made appropriate impressed noises about the dragon, while Marcus explained his inspiration in enthusiastic detail. Victoria excused herself gracefully, drifting back into the crowd, and Caleb found himself swept up in the social current of the evening, meeting other parents, admiring other students' work, watching Maisie bloom under the attention and praise. It was exhausting, it was overwhelming, and it was, Caleb had to admit, good. The showcase ran until 8 o'clock, but Caleb and Maisie stayed until nearly the end, Maisie reluctant to leave her artwork and her newfound social circle. On the drive home, she chattered nonstop about the evening, who had said what about her sunflowers, which pieces she'd liked best, how Mrs. Patterson had told her she should consider entering a regional art competition. Caleb listened, offering encouragement and asking questions, but part of his mind was stuck on Victoria's words. There's something else Rebecca asked me to tell you. What else could there be? What other message had his wife left behind? And why had Victoria held it back? Maisie fell asleep almost immediately after they got home, exhausted from the evening's excitement. Caleb tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and stood for a moment looking at the sunflower drawings on her wall. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Victoria. You're probably wondering about what I said. Can we meet tomorrow? I think it's time. Caleb stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Every instinct told him to say no, to leave the past buried where it belonged. But he'd come this far. Maisie was happy. The sunflowers were blooming. Maybe it was time to hear the rest of Rebecca's final words. Same coffee shop? 10 a.m.? I'll be there. Caleb went to bed that night with the uneasy sense that tomorrow would change everything. Again. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched Caleb's mood perfectly. He dropped Maisie off at Mrs. Chen's house for a few hours. She had a play date scheduled with a friend from school, and drove to Brewster's coffee house with his stomach in knots. Victoria was already there when he arrived, sitting in the same corner booth they'd occupied weeks earlier. This time she had a real coffee instead of punch, and she looked tired in a way the careful makeup couldn't quite hide. Rough night? Caleb asked, sliding into the seat across from her. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about this conversation. That makes two of us. Victoria wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, gathering her thoughts. Caleb waited, forcing himself to be patient even though anxiety was clawing at his chest. What I told you at our first meeting was true, Victoria began. Rebecca did ask me to deliver that message about letting light back into your life. But there was more to that conversation. More that I didn't share because I wasn't sure you were ready. I'm here now, Caleb said. So tell me. Victoria took a deep breath. Rebecca knew she was dying, Caleb. She was completely lucid in those final minutes, and she used that time very deliberately. She didn't waste it on denial or false hope. She asked me 3 specific things. 3? First, to deliver the message I already gave you. Second, Victoria paused, her fingers tightening around her mug. Second, she asked me to promise that if I ever had the chance, I would make sure Maisie had access to art education. She was very specific about that. She said that Maisie saw the world in colors and shapes, and that stifling that gift would be like cutting off oxygen. Caleb felt his chest constrict. She knew.
Even then, she knew what Maisie needed. Mothers often do, and Rebecca was clearly a remarkable mother. What was the third thing? Caleb asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. Victoria met his eyes, and in that moment, Caleb saw vulnerability beneath her CEO composure. She asked me to promise that when I found you, when I delivered her message, I wouldn't just walk away. She asked me to stay, to make sure you and Maisie weren't alone, to be... Victoria's voice caught slightly. To be there if you needed someone. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. That's why you moved back here, Caleb said slowly. That's why you took over the foundation partnership personally. You weren't just keeping a promise. You were planning to insert yourself into our lives. It sounds predatory when you put it like that, Victoria said, but she didn't deny it. I prefer to think of it as honoring a dying woman's wishes. Caleb stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor just like it had the first time they'd met here. You don't get to do that. You don't get to show up and play savior because my wife asked you to. We're not a charity case. I never said you were. Then what are we? What am I supposed to do with this information? You've been orchestrating everything, the arts program, the showcase, all of it, because of some deathbed promise? That's not help, Victoria. That's manipulation. Victoria's expression hardened. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, I've watched you start to come back to life over the past few weeks. I've watched Maisie flourish. I've watched you both begin to heal. If that's manipulation, then I'm guilty as charged. We were fine before you showed up. You were surviving. There's a difference. Victoria stood to face him, and there was steel in her voice now. And yes, I moved back here because of Rebecca's request. Yes, I made sure Maisie had access to art supplies and opportunities, but I didn't force you to put sunflowers on your kitchen table. I didn't force you to start talking about Rebecca with Maisie. I didn't force you to show up at that showcase last night and let your daughter shine. Those were your choices, Caleb. I just opened some doors. Doors I didn't ask for. No, doors Rebecca asked for, on your behalf. Victoria's voice softened. Look, I know this is a lot. I know it feels like I've overstepped. And maybe I have. But Rebecca was right about one thing. You were drowning, and you didn't even know it. Someone needed to throw you a lifeline. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to maintain his anger because anger was easier than facing the truth in her words. But standing there in the coffee shop, looking at this woman who'd carried his wife's final wishes for 3 years, he felt his defenses crumble. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why did you care so much? You didn't know us. You didn't owe Rebecca anything. Why spend 3 years tracking us down, moving back here, investing so much time and energy into strangers? Victoria's expression shifted, vulnerability breaking through her composure. Because when my sister died, no one did that for me. No one stepped in to make sure I was okay. No one pushed me to keep living instead of just existing. And I spent years drowning in anger and grief because I didn't know there was another way. When Rebecca asked me to look after you and Maisie, she gave me a chance to do for someone else what no one had done for me. To maybe save you from making the same mistakes I made. The honesty in her voice stripped away the last of Caleb's anger, leaving only raw emotion in its wake. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to let someone help. How to let anyone get close enough to see how broken we still are. You're not broken, Caleb. You're healing. There's a difference. Victoria sat back down, and after a moment, Caleb did too. And for what it's worth, you don't have to do anything with this information. I've kept my promise to Rebecca. I've made sure Maisie has access to art education. I've delivered the message. What happens next is entirely up to you. What if I ask you to walk away? Then I walk away. The foundation partnership with the school will continue. That's already in motion and doesn't depend on me personally. But I'll step back from anything directly involving you or Maisie. Caleb studied her face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. But all he saw was exhaustion and sincerity, and something that looked like hope barely held in check. I don't want you to walk away, he said, surprising himself. But I need time to process all of this, to figure out what it means. Take all the time you need. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the coffee shop bustling around them with Saturday morning activity. Finally, Caleb asked the question that had been nagging at him since the showcase. Last night, you looked at Maisie's artwork like it meant something personal to you.
The portrait of Rebecca. You stood there for a long time just staring at it. Victoria's smile was sad. I did. Because seeing that portrait, seeing how Maisie remembered her mother as beautiful and surrounded by flowers, it reminded me that Rebecca's last conscious thoughts weren't about her own death. They were about making sure her family would be okay. That kind of love, she trailed off, shaking her head. That's the kind of love that deserves to be honored. By a stranger? Is that what I am? Victoria asked. Still a stranger? Caleb considered the question. A month ago, the answer would have been an unequivocal yes. But now, after everything, after the message delivered, the showcase attended, the quiet support offered, he wasn't sure what Victoria Hale was to him. Not a stranger, not quite a friend. Something in between, something undefined. I don't know what you are, he admitted, but I know you're not a stranger anymore. Victoria's smile reached her eyes this time. That's a start. They talked for another hour, Victoria sharing more details about that night at the hospital, how Rebecca had been calm despite the pain, focused entirely on making sure Caleb would understand what she needed him to know, how she'd described Maisie as her little artist and predicted that the girl would need creative outlets to process her grief, how she'd made Victoria repeat back the promises multiple times until she was satisfied they'd been understood correctly. She was very specific, Victoria said, almost like she'd been planning what to say in case something happened, like she'd thought about it before. She had, Caleb said quietly. After Maisie was born, Rebecca became paranoid about dying young. Her mother had died in her 30s, cancer, and Rebecca was convinced she'd inherited some genetic time bomb. I used to tell her she was being ridiculous, that we'd grow old together, but she made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd make sure Maisie knew how much she was loved. And did you keep that promise? Caleb thought about the 3 years of silence, the photographs put away, the conversations avoided. Not the way she wanted me to. I kept Maisie safe and fed and educated, but I didn't talk about Rebecca. Didn't keep her memory alive the way I should have. I thought protecting Maisie from the pain meant not talking about it. And now? Now I'm learning that the opposite is true. That talking about Rebecca, sharing memories, celebrating who she was, that's what Maisie needed all along, what we both needed. Victoria reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. You're learning. That's what matters. And you're doing it now, while Maisie's still young enough to really benefit from it. Some people never figure it out. Her hand was warm, and the gesture felt both comforting and terrifying in its intimacy. Caleb pulled back gently, not ready for that level of connection. I should get going, he said, checking his watch. I told Mrs. Chen I'd pick Maisie up by noon. Of course, Victoria gathered her things. Caleb, thank you for listening, for being willing to hear the rest of Rebecca's message. Thank you for keeping your promise, even if it was weird and manipulative and completely overwhelming. She laughed, and the sound was surprisingly genuine. I'll take that as a compliment. They walked out to the parking lot together, and Caleb was struck by how normal it felt, like two people who'd just had coffee, not two people untangling complicated grief and deathbed promises. Will I see you around? Victoria asked as they reached their respective cars. Probably. Small town, after all. True. And the foundation has more events planned at Riverside Elementary. Hard to avoid each other. Did you plan that too? But there was no accusation in Caleb's tone, just wry acknowledgement. Maybe a little, Victoria admitted with a smile. I'm very good at long-term planning. Caleb shook his head, but he was smiling too. I noticed. He drove home feeling lighter somehow, despite, or maybe because of, the heavy conversation. Learning that Victoria had been orchestrating things should have made him angry, should have felt like a violation. But instead, it felt like Rebecca reaching out from beyond the grave to make sure they were okay. Like even in death, she'd been trying to take care of them. Maisie was full of energy when he picked her up, bouncing with stories about her playdate. As they drove home, she asked, Can we get art supplies today? Like the good ones? Mrs. Patterson said I should practice with different materials. Sure, Bug. We can go to the art supply store after lunch. Really? The real art store? Not just the dollar store? The real one. You're a real artist now. You deserve real supplies. Maisie's squeal of delight was so pure, so unguarded, that Caleb felt his chest tighten with emotion. This was what Rebecca had wanted, this enthusiasm, this joy, this life. They spent the afternoon at Morrison Art Supply, the same shopping center as the grocery store where he'd first encountered Victoria, though Caleb tried not to think about that coincidence. Or maybe it wasn't a coincidence at all. Maybe Victoria had known this was where they'd eventually end up. Maisie explored the aisles with reverent wonder, touching expensive brush sets and high-quality paper like they were treasure. Caleb let her choose whatever she wanted, ignoring the growing total on his mental calculation. When had he become someone who bought his daughter $70 colored pencil sets without flinching? When he'd started letting light back in, apparently. At home, Maisie spread her new supplies across the kitchen table and immediately started sketching. Caleb made dinner, grilled chicken and vegetables, nothing fancy, and they ate while she drew, her attention split between her food and her art. "What are you working on?" Caleb asked. "It's a secret, for now." But she smiled as she said it, and Caleb didn't push. After dinner, while Maisie continued drawing, Caleb found himself pulling out his phone and scrolling to Victoria's number. He typed out a message, deleted it, typed another one. Finally, he settled on, "Spent way too much money at the art store today. Maisie's over the moon. Thank you. For all of it." The response came a few minutes later. That's what Rebecca wanted. Money well spent. Then, after a pause, "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you let me help. Even if it was weird and manipulative." Caleb smiled at his phone, especially because it was weird and manipulative. He set the phone down and went to sit with Maisie, watching her work on her secret project. The house felt different than it had a month ago. Warmer, fuller, like something frozen had finally started to thaw, like light had found its way back in through the cracks. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. The weeks following the art showcase settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, which terrified Caleb more than he wanted to admit. Normal meant vulnerable. Normal meant there was something to lose. But Maisie was thriving in ways he couldn't ignore. She came home from school each day chattering about art class, about the new techniques Mrs. Patterson was teaching, about the mural project the third graders were planning for the spring. The quiet, careful child who'd learned to make herself small had been replaced by someone brighter, louder, more herself. And Victoria Hale had somehow become a fixture in that transformation. It started small, a text here and there checking on how Maisie was doing with her new art supplies. An invitation to a foundation-sponsored gallery opening that featured young artists from across the district. Then, 3 weeks after their conversation at Brewster's, Victoria showed up at Riverside Elementary for Career Day. Caleb only knew because Maisie came running to the truck at pickup, practically vibrating with excitement. "Daddy, guess who came to talk to our class today about business and helping schools?" "Let me guess," Caleb said, though his stomach had already tightened with the knowledge. "Victoria Hale?" "Yes, and she was so cool. She told us about how she used to be scared of public speaking when she was our age, and how she learned to be brave even when she was nervous. And she brought these really pretty notebooks for everyone and said we should use them to write down our dreams." Maisie clutched a leather-bound journal against her chest. "Look how nice it is." Caleb examined the notebook. Quality leather, thick cream pages, the Hale Foundation logo embossed discreetly on the back cover. Nothing about it was cheap or throwaway. "That was generous of her," he said carefully. "She's really nice, Daddy. And she remembered me from the art showcase. She asked if I was still drawing sunflowers." "What did you tell her?" "That I'm drawing lots of things now. I showed her the sketch I did of our house. She said I have a good eye for architecture." Maisie stumbled slightly over the big word, but her pride was evident. "Do I have a good eye for architecture?" "I think you have a good eye for everything, Bug." That evening, after Maisie was in bed, Caleb found himself texting Victoria. "Career Day? Really? The Foundation does career days at all our partner schools. It's part of the program. And the notebooks? Every student got one. Not special treatment, if that's what you're worried about." Caleb stared at his phone, trying to figure out if he was annoyed or grateful, or some complicated mixture of both. Before he could formulate a response, another message appeared. "Though I will admit I was hoping to see Maisie. She lights up a room." "She does," Caleb typed back. "She gets that from her mother." "Maybe. But I think she gets her resilience from her father." The words settled in Caleb's chest, warm and uncomfortable. He set his phone down without responding, but he read the message 3 more times before going to bed. 2 days later, Victoria called him directly. Not a text, an actual phone call. Caleb almost didn't answer,
his thumb hovering over the decline button before curiosity won out.
Hello? Caleb, hi. I hope I'm not calling too late. Victoria's voice sounded slightly breathless, like she'd been rushing. It's 8:30. I'm still up. What's going on? I have a proposition for you. Well, for Maisie technically, but I wanted to run it by you first. Papers rustled in the background. The foundation is sponsoring a mentorship program pairing young artists with professional artists in the community. Week-long intensive sessions during winter break. Mrs. Patterson nominated Maisie, and I think it would be an incredible opportunity for her. Caleb's protective instincts flared immediately. How young are we talking? Maisie's only 8. The program is for ages 8 to 12. There would be age-appropriate groups, full supervision, and the sessions would be held at the Community Arts Center downtown. 4 hours a day for 5 days, with a showcase at the end of the week. And you're telling me this because? Because I wanted you to hear about it from me first, not from a permission slip sent home in Maisie's backpack. And because I know you, Caleb, I know your first instinct will be to say no because it feels scary and unknown. But I'm asking you to think about what Maisie needs, not what feels safe. The directness of it stung, mostly because she was right. His immediate reaction had been to find reasons why it was a bad idea. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I ask. The permission forms go out next week. No pressure, but Maisie has real talent. She deserves the chance to develop it. After they hung up, Caleb sat on his couch, staring at nothing. A month ago, he would have dismissed the idea out of hand. Too much change, too much exposure to the outside world, too much risk of Maisie getting hurt or disappointed. But now, with sunflowers on his kitchen table and drawings covering Maisie's walls, and the memory of her face at the showcase still fresh in his mind, he couldn't quite justify keeping her small and safe anymore. He signed the permission form when it came home the following week.
Maisie's shriek of joy when he told her was worth the anxiety churning in his gut. Winter break arrived with the first real snowfall of the season, and Caleb found himself driving Maisie to the Community Arts Center at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, his coffee barely touched and his nerves strung tight. "You don't have to walk me in, Daddy," Maisie said as they pulled into the parking lot. "I'm not a baby." "I know you're not, but I'm walking you in anyway. First day of anything means I get to be overprotective."
She rolled her eyes but smiled, grabbing her new art supply bag, another careful purchase from their weekend shopping trip, and climbing out of the truck. The Arts Center was a renovated warehouse space, all exposed brick and high ceilings and natural light pouring through enormous windows. Inside, clusters of kids gathered with their parents, while teaching artists set up stations with easels, canvases, and supplies. "Maisie!" A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Victoria appeared from a side office, dressed more casually than Caleb had seen her, jeans, a cream sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger somehow, less CEO, more human. "Ms. Hale!" Maisie lit up, and Caleb felt something twist in his chest at the easy affection between them. "Are you ready for your first day?" Victoria asked, crouching to Maisie's level. "Super ready. I brought all my new supplies like the email said." "Perfect. Your group is with Mr. Chen. He's the gentleman over there with the paint-splattered apron. He specializes in watercolors and mixed media. I think you two will get along wonderfully." Victoria straightened and met Caleb's eyes. "I didn't know if you'd actually signed the form." "Neither did I, honestly." "What changed your mind?" Caleb glanced at Maisie, who was already eyeing the watercolor station with barely contained excitement. "Someone told me I needed to think about what Maisie needs instead of what feels safe." Victoria's smile was soft. "Smart person, whoever that was." "Kind of pushy, actually, but not wrong." A bell chimed, and a woman with a clipboard called for the students to gather with their assigned mentors. Maisie hugged Caleb quickly. "Love you, Daddy," and ran to join her group without a backward glance. Just like that, she was absorbed into the creative chaos, leaving Caleb standing awkwardly near the entrance. "She'll be fine," Victoria said beside him. "More than fine. She'll be amazing." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen her work, and because she has something a lot of talented people lack, genuine passion. When someone loves what they're doing, it shows." They walked toward the exit together, Victoria's heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. Outside, the December air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of snow. Do you have plans for the next 4 hours? Victoria asked suddenly. Caleb had planned to go to the construction site, catch up on paperwork, maybe grab breakfast somewhere. Normal Monday morning routine. Nothing concrete. Why? Because there's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here that makes an obscenely good latte, and I'm officially off the clock until this afternoon. I thought maybe we could, I don't know, talk, if you want. Every rational part of Caleb's brain screamed that this was a bad idea, that getting closer to Victoria Hale meant opening doors he'd worked hard to keep closed, that coffee meant conversation meant connection, and connection meant vulnerability he wasn't sure he was ready for. Okay, he heard himself say. Lead the way. The coffee shop was called Grounds for Joy, and it was exactly the kind of place Rebecca would have loved. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, the smell of fresh roasted beans heavy in the air. They ordered at the counter Caleb's usual black coffee, Victoria's complicated latte with oat milk and an extra shot, and claimed a corner table by the window. You come here often? Caleb asked, then immediately winced at how awkward it sounded. Victoria laughed. Smooth, but yes, actually. When I moved back to town, I made a point of finding the best coffee within walking distance of the foundation office. This place won. How long have you been back? You said 2 months when we first met, but that was weeks ago now. Almost 4 months total. I moved back in August, spent September getting the foundation office set up, and started active engagement with the schools in October. She took a sip of her latte, leaving a faint foam mustache that she wiped away absently. It's been a whirlwind, honestly. Where were you before? Boston. I was running the Northeast division of a corporate consulting firm. Big office, bigger salary, 80-hour work weeks. Victoria's expression grew distant. I was good at it, very good. But I was also miserable. So you left? So I ran away, more accurately. After my sister died, I threw myself into work because it was easier than dealing with grief. 20 years later, I woke up one day and realized I'd built an entire life around avoiding pain. That's not living. That's just existing with a better paycheck. Caleb understood that more than he wanted to admit. What made you leave Boston specifically? Why come back here? Victoria traced the rim of her coffee cup, choosing her words carefully. Because this is where I was from originally, where my sister and I grew up, and because I'd been carrying Rebecca's message for 3 years, and I knew if I didn't act on it soon, I never would. So I cashed in some favors, got myself appointed to oversee the Foundation's education initiative here, and moved back. Just like that. Just like that. Well, there was also a considerable amount of therapy involved, but yes, sometimes the scariest decisions are the ones we need to make most. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching snow begin to fall outside the window. Soft flakes that caught the morning light and transformed the street into something from a storybook. Can I ask you something? Caleb said finally. Anything. Why do you care so much? About Maisie? About me? About keeping Rebecca's promise? I get that you lost your sister, and I'm sorry about that. But dedicating months of your life to strangers seems like a lot. Victoria set down her coffee and met his eyes directly. Because when you lose someone suddenly, violently, without getting to say goodbye, it leaves a wound that never fully heals. You learn to live around it, but it's always there. And I spent 20 years letting that wound define me, letting it make me hard and distant and afraid of connecting with people. When Rebecca asked me to look after you and Maisie, she gave me permission to be someone different, someone who helps instead of hiding. I needed that as much as you needed someone to push you toward healing. So we're both charity cases? But there was no heat in Caleb's words. We're both people trying to figure out how to live with loss. That's not charity, that's just being human. The snow outside picked up intensity, coating the world in white. Caleb thought about the past few weeks. The changes in Maisie, the sunflowers on his table, the conversations about Rebecca that no longer felt like walking on broken glass. Victoria had been the catalyst for all of it, whether he wanted to admit it or not. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything, for keeping your promise to Rebecca, for seeing what Maisie needed before I could, for, he struggled to find words, for not giving up on us. Victoria's eyes went suspiciously bright. You're welcome. Though I think you give me too much credit. You're the one who did the hard work. I just opened some doors. You opened a lot of doors. Well, I'm very good at my job. They talked for another hour, conversation flowing more easily than Caleb would have expected. Victoria told him about growing up here, about her sister Jenny, who'd been killed by a drunk driver the summer before Victoria's senior year of high school, about how she'd left town for college and never really come back until now, about building a career in corporate consulting because it required logic and strategy instead of emotions. Caleb shared stories about Rebecca, their first date at Rosie's Diner, the way she'd cried when Maisie was born, her obsession with sunflowers and old musicals and terrible puns. Talking about her to Victoria felt different than it had with other people, less like performing grief and more like sharing memories with someone who actually wanted to hear them. When Caleb finally checked his watch, he was shocked to realize it was almost 11:30. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "I've got a site meeting at noon. And I have a board call at 1. Victoria gathered her coat and scarf. "But this was nice. We should do it again sometime." "Yeah, we should." Outside, the snow had transformed the street into a winter wonderland. They stood awkwardly by their cars, parked coincidentally next to each other, neither quite ready to leave. "Caleb?" Victoria said as he reached for his door handle. "Yeah? I know this is all probably weird for you, having someone new in your life, especially someone connected to Rebecca's death. If it ever gets to be too much, just tell me. I'll back off." Caleb considered this, thought about how much had changed in the past month, how much lighter he felt despite the fear that still lurked at the edges. "It is weird," he admitted, "but I think I'm starting to realize that weird isn't necessarily bad, and you're not just connected to Rebecca's death anymore. You're becoming part of the reason Maisie and I might actually be okay." Victoria smiled and it transformed her entire face. "That's all I ever wanted." She drove away first, her sleek sedan disappearing into the snow-covered traffic. Caleb sat in his truck for another minute, processing the morning, before heading to his site meeting with his mind only half on construction schedules. The mentorship program became the highlight of Maisie's winter break. Each day, Caleb dropped her off at 8 and picked her up at noon, and each day she emerged buzzing with excitement about what she'd learned. Mr. Chen was teaching them about color theory, about layering techniques, about how to capture light and shadow. Maisie's vocabulary expanded to include words like composition and perspective and negative space. And each day, Victoria happened to be at the Arts Center. Sometimes she was in meetings, visible through the glass walls of the office. Sometimes she was walking through the studio spaces, observing the students' progress. And sometimes, more often than coincidence could explain, she was near the entrance when Caleb arrived for pickup. "You're here a lot," Caleb observed on the third day, not quite accusing. "It's a foundation program. I like to stay hands-on." Victoria's smile was innocent, but her eyes held mischief. "Plus, the coffee shop nearby has really grown on me." "Is that so?" "Completely unrelated to present company, of course." Caleb shook his head, fighting his own smile. "Of course." On Thursday, pickup time brought an unexpected complication. Caleb arrived at noon to find Maisie sitting on a bench outside Mr. Chen's studio, tears streaming down her face, while a teaching assistant tried unsuccessfully to comfort her. His heart lurched into his throat. He was across the room in seconds, dropping to his knees in front of his daughter. "Maisie, bug, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak through her tears. The teaching assistant, a college-aged girl with purple streaks in her hair, looked relieved to see him. "She's not hurt," the girl said quickly. "She just got frustrated with her painting. Sometimes the perfectionist students have the hardest time when things don't turn out exactly how they envision." Caleb looked past Maisie to the easel inside the studio where a half-finished watercolor sat. Even from this distance, he could see it was beautiful. A landscape with trees and a stream, the colors bleeding together in that way watercolors did. "It's ugly," Maisie sobbed. "The water looks all muddy and wrong, and the trees are too dark, and it's supposed to be peaceful, but it just looks messy." Hey, look at me." Caleb tilted her chin up gently. "Breathe, okay? Just breathe with me." They did their breathing exercise, in for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, that the grief counselor had taught them years ago. Gradually, Maisie's sobs subsided into hiccuping breaths. "Better?" Caleb asked. She nodded, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "Can I see the painting?" "It's terrible." Let me be the judge of that. They walked into the studio together, and Caleb studied the watercolor more closely. The water did look muddy in places, and the trees were darker than they probably should have been, but there was also something hauntingly beautiful about it, a melancholy quality that spoke to emotion rather than technical perfection. You're right that it's not perfect, Caleb said carefully. But perfect isn't always the goal, is it? Sometimes art is about feeling. But I wanted it to be beautiful, like the picture Mr. Chen showed us. What's going on here? Victoria's voice came from the doorway. She must have heard the commotion from her office. Maisie's upset about her painting, the teaching assistant explained. Victoria walked over to the easel, studying the watercolor with professional assessment. May I? Maisie nodded miserably. This is interesting work, Victoria said, and there was no condescension in her tone. The technical execution needs refinement, yes, but the emotional content is remarkable. This doesn't feel like a happy landscape. It feels like a memory of something that was beautiful but is now bittersweet. Was that intentional? Maisie blinked, surprised. I was trying to paint the park where my mom used to take me before she died. Ah. Victoria's expression softened. Then this painting is absolutely perfect, Maisie, because bittersweet memories aren't supposed to be technically flawless. They're supposed to feel real. Really? Really. Some of the best art in the world is technically imperfect but emotionally true. That's what makes it powerful. Maisie looked at her painting with new eyes, considering this perspective. So it's okay that it's messy? It's not messy, it's honest. Victoria glanced at Caleb. Your father could probably tell you that the hardest things to create are often the ones that come from real emotion. Caleb nodded, his throat tight. Your mom used to say that perfection was boring, that the cracks in things were what let the light through. She said that? Maisie asked. All the time, usually when she burned dinner or broke something or made mistakes. She believed imperfection made things interesting. Maisie turned back to her painting, tilting her head. Maybe I'll call it Memory of Mom's Park. Mr. Chen said we have to name our final pieces. I think that's a perfect name, Victoria said. The crisis passed, and Maisie went to wash her hands and gather her supplies. Caleb found himself standing next to Victoria, both of them looking at the watercolor. Thank you for that, he said quietly, for knowing what to say. I meant every word. She's incredibly talented, Caleb, and more importantly, she's learning to use art to process emotions. That's a gift most adults never develop. She gets that from her mother, too. Maybe, but I think she's also getting permission from her father now. To feel things, to express things. That matters more than you know. Before Caleb could respond, Maisie returned with her bag and coat. They said their goodbyes and headed out into the cold December afternoon, but as Caleb helped Maisie into the truck, he caught Victoria watching them from the Arts Center window. She raised a hand in a small wave, and he waved back before driving away. That evening, Maisie taped Memory of Mom's Park to her bedroom wall despite its technical imperfections. Caleb stood in her doorway watching her arrange it among her other works and felt something shift in his chest. His daughter was learning to hold grief and joy simultaneously, to create beauty from pain, to honor her mother's memory without being crushed by it. That night, after Maisie was asleep, Caleb pulled out his phone and sent Victoria a text. You were good with her today. Really good. Thank you for helping her see that imperfect can still be beautiful. The response came quickly. That lesson applies to more than just art, you know? Life itself is messy and imperfect. Doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. Caleb stared at the message for a long time, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. You're very wise for a pushy CEO. I prefer persistent. And you're very brave for a terrified single dad. I'm not that brave. You showed up to the mentorship program. You let Maisie create art about her grief. You're talking about Rebecca without falling apart. That's brave, Caleb. Don't sell yourself short. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he changed the subject. Final showcase is tomorrow. Are you going to be there? Wouldn't miss it. I want to see all the finished pieces. Just the pieces? There was a longer pause before the next message appeared. No, not just the pieces. Caleb's heart did something complicated in his chest. He set the phone down and went to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. The final day of the mentorship program arrived with unseasonably warm weather that melted much of the week's snow into gray slush. The showcase was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, giving students the morning to add final touches to their work. Caleb arrived early, finding the Arts Center transformed once again. The students' completed pieces were displayed throughout the main studio, each one carefully mounted and labeled with the young artist's name and title. Parents and community members filed in. Coffee and cookies set out on tables along the walls. He found Maisie's watercolor easily. It was displayed prominently in the 8 to 10 age group section. Memory of Mom's Park by Maisie Foster. Seeing it in this context, surrounded by other students' work, Caleb could appreciate what Victoria had said. Yes, it was technically imperfect, but it was also deeply emotional, carrying a weight that more polished pieces lacked. It's stunning, isn't it? Caleb turned to find Victoria beside him, dressed in another of her elegant outfits, charcoal slacks and a burgundy blouse that brought out warm tones in her skin. It is, he agreed. I still can't quite believe my 8-year-old created something like this. Grief makes artists of us all sometimes. We just have to be brave enough to let it out. They stood together, shoulders almost touching, watching other families admire the displayed work. Maisie was across the room with her mentor group, chattering excitedly with the other students. She looked so happy, so animated, so completely unlike the withdrawn child she'd been months ago. She's changed so much, Caleb said softly. You both have. Is that what you planned when you moved back here with Rebecca's message? Victoria was quiet for a moment. I planned to keep a promise. What's happened beyond that? I don't think either of us planned this. This? Caleb turned to look at her directly. She met his eyes, and in that moment, something passed between them. Acknowledgement of the connection that had been building despite Caleb's resistance, despite the complicated circumstances of how they'd met. This, Victoria repeated, gesturing vaguely between them. This friendship, this whatever it is. It's terrifying, Caleb admitted. I know. But maybe terrifying isn't the same as bad. Before Caleb could respond, the program director called everyone to attention for the mentor's closing remarks. They stood through speeches about artistic growth and creative expression and the importance of arts education. Maisie was called up with her group to receive certificates of completion, and Caleb took approximately 1,000 photos on his phone, pride swelling in his chest. After the formal program ended, families mingled while students showed off their work. Caleb was talking to another parent about the program when Maisie suddenly appeared at his elbow, tugging urgently on his sleeve. Daddy, I don't feel good. He looked down at her, immediately noticing the flush in her cheeks that hadn't been there moments before. He pressed the back of his hand to her forehead and felt heat radiating from her skin. You're burning up, Bug. How long have you felt sick? Just now, my throat hurts and everything feels weird. But Caleb's mind immediately went into crisis mode. Okay, let's get you home. Go grab your coat. But when Maisie took a step toward the coat rack, her legs buckled. Caleb caught her before she hit the floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. Maisie! Her eyes were glassy with fever, unfocused. Around them, people turned to look, concern rippling through the crowd. Someone call 911, a parent said. No, wait. Victoria was suddenly there, her hand on Caleb's arm. Caleb, look at me. Is she breathing normally? He forced himself to check, to think through his panic. Yes, she's breathing fine. Is she conscious? I'm okay, Maisie mumbled against his chest, just really hot and tired. It's probably just a high fever, Victoria said calmly. Kids spike them fast, but we should get her to urgent care to be safe. My car's right outside. I'll drive. Caleb wanted to argue, to maintain control, to handle this himself. But Maisie felt like dead weight in his arms, and his hands were shaking too badly to trust himself behind the wheel. Okay, he managed. Okay, let's go. Victoria moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing coats and bags while Caleb carried Maisie to the parking lot. She directed him to her sedan, helping him settle Maisie in the back seat before climbing into the driver's seat. There's an urgent care facility 3 blocks from here, Victoria said, already pulling out of the parking lot. Faster than the ER. Caleb sat in the back with Maisie, monitoring her breathing, her color, the heat radiating from her small body. She drifted in and out of awareness,
mumbling about her painting and being tired and wanting to go home. "She's going to be okay," Victoria said from the front seat, her voice steady and sure. "High fevers look scary, but kids bounce back fast. Trust me." "How do you know?" "Because I've been through this before. My sister used to spike fevers like this."
Terrified our parents every time until they learned it was just how her body responded to infections. They reached the urgent care in less than 5 minutes. Victoria pulled right up to the entrance, through the car and park, and jumped out to help Caleb carry Maisie inside. The staff took them back immediately, the nurse checking Maisie's vitals while asking Caleb rapid-fire questions about symptoms and medical history. Fever of 103.2, rapid onset, sore throat, possible strep. "We'll run a quick test," the nurse said. "Doctor will be in shortly." And then they waited. Caleb sat beside Maisie's examination table, holding her hot little hand, while Victoria stood near the door, giving them space but not leaving entirely. "You don't have to stay," Caleb said. "I know, but I'm going to anyway." The doctor confirmed strep throat, common, treatable, nothing to panic about. Antibiotics prescribed, fluids and rest recommended. Maisie would be back to normal in 48 hours. The relief that flooded through Caleb was so intense it left him lightheaded. When they finally walked out of the urgent care clinic an hour later, Maisie already looking slightly better from the fever reducer they'd administered, Caleb felt like he'd aged 10 years. "Thank you," he said to Victoria as she drove them back to the arts center to get his truck. "For staying calm, for knowing what to do, for being there." "Of course, that's what—" Victoria stopped herself. "What friends do," Caleb supplied. She glanced at him in the rearview mirror, a small smile playing at her lips. "I was going to say that's what family does, but yes, friends works too." Maisie was asleep in the back seat, her head resting against Caleb's shoulder. He looked down at her peaceful face, then back up to catch Victoria's eyes in the mirror. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "At crisis management, at knowing what people need, at being exactly who someone needs you to be in the moment. Years of corporate training, it's all about reading the room and responding appropriately." "I don't think it's training. I think it's who you are." Victoria pulled into the Arts Center parking lot, but didn't immediately put the car in park. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I got the call that my sister had been in an accident, I was 17 and at a party. I drove drunk to the hospital because I was terrified and stupid and thought getting there fast mattered more than getting there safe. I made it, but I could have killed someone. Could have killed myself. For years after, I punished myself for that choice, convinced myself I didn't deserve to be happy because I'd been so reckless on the worst night of my life." Caleb didn't know what to say, so he just listened. "What I'm trying to say is that I understand what it's like to be terrified for someone you love, and I understand the guilt that comes after. But I've also learned that fear and guilt can't be what drives us. At some point, we have to choose to live again, really live. Is that what you're doing now? Living again?" Victoria finally put the car in park and turned to face him. "I'm trying, same as you." They looked at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Maisie stirred, mumbling in her fever sleep, and the moment broke. "I should get her home," Caleb said. "Of course. Call me if you need anything. Medicine runs, soup delivery, someone to talk to at 3 a.m. when you're worried. Anything." "I will." But as Caleb transferred Maisie to his truck and drove home through the darkening afternoon, he realized Victoria had become more than just someone who'd delivered a message from his dead wife. She'd become someone he trusted, someone he relied on, someone who showed up when it mattered and stayed when things got hard, someone who felt dangerously close to becoming essential. And that realization terrified him almost as much as watching Maisie collapse had. Maisie recovered from strep throat exactly as the doctor predicted: 48 hours of rest, antibiotics, and soup, and she was back to her energetic self. But something in Caleb hadn't recovered. The moment when Maisie's legs had buckled, when he'd caught her limp body in his arms, had ripped open every carefully sealed compartment where he kept his fear. He'd almost lost her. It didn't matter that it was just strep throat, that children got sick all the time, that the outcome was never truly in question. For those terrible minutes between the Arts Center and the urgent care clinic, his mind had gone to the worst possible places. And in every single one of those dark scenarios, Victoria had been there. That realization sat in his chest like a stone for days after. You've been quiet, Victoria said during one of their now regular coffee meetings at Grounds for Joy. It was the week before Christmas, and the shop was decorated with garlands and twinkling lights that Rebecca would have loved.
Is everything okay with Maisie? She's fine, completely back to normal, already asking when the next art class starts. Then what's bothering you? Caleb wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, the heat almost painful against his palms. When she got sick, when I was holding her, and she felt so hot and fragile, all I could think was that I can't do this again. I can't lose someone else I love. I can't survive that twice. Caleb, and you were there, he continued, the words spilling out before he could stop them. You drove us. You stayed calm. You knew exactly what to do. And I realized that somewhere along the way you stopped being the stranger who delivered a message. You became someone I depend on, someone Maisie depends on. And that terrifies me because people we depend on can disappear.
Victoria set down her coffee carefully, her expression unreadable. Is that what you think I'm going to do? Disappear? Everyone disappears eventually. Some people just do it sooner than others. That's a bleak way to live. It's a realistic way to live, Caleb countered. Rebecca didn't plan to die. She didn't wake up that morning thinking it was her last day. But it was. And I can't let myself forget that could happen to anyone, at any time. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with those sharp, assessing eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. You're right. People die. People leave. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance. I could walk out of here and get hit by a bus. You could have a heart attack tomorrow. Maisie could get sick again, really sick, and there's nothing either of us could do about it. She leaned forward, holding his gaze. But living in constant fear of loss isn't protecting you from pain, Caleb. It's just guaranteeing you'll never experience real joy either. Is that really what you want for yourself? For Maisie? I want to keep her safe. Safe from what? From caring about people? From letting people care about her? Because I've got news for you. She already cares. About her teachers, her classmates, her art mentor, and yes, about me. You can't protect her from the possibility of loss without also protecting her from the possibility of love. And that's not protection, that's prison. The words hit harder than Caleb expected. He thought about Maisie's face at the art showcase, glowing with pride and joy. Thought about her excitement over the mentorship program, her tears over the imperfect watercolor, her easy affection with Victoria. His daughter was already out in the world, already opening her heart, already taking risks he'd spent 3 years trying to shield her from. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his voice rough. How to care about someone new without being paralyzed by the fear of losing them. You just do it. One day at a time. One moment at a time. You show up, you stay present, and you trust that whatever happens, you'll find a way through it. Victoria reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture so natural it didn't even feel like a choice. Just like you found a way through everything else. Caleb looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her skin, the steadiness of her grip. It would be so easy to hold on, so easy to let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, letting someone in wouldn't end in devastation. But the fear was still there, coiled tight in his chest, whispering that everyone he loved was temporary. He pulled his hand back gently. I need time to think about all of this. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, hurt maybe or disappointment, but she nodded. Take all the time you need. They finished their coffee in strained silence, the easy rapport they'd built over weeks feeling suddenly fragile. When they parted ways in the parking lot, Victoria's goodbye felt weighted with things unsaid. Caleb drove home feeling like he'd made a terrible mistake, though he couldn't quite articulate what it was. The next few days passed in a fog of routine. Christmas was coming, and Caleb threw himself into preparations, shopping for gifts, decorating the house with Maisie, planning their Christmas Eve dinner. It was easier to focus on logistics than to examine the hollow feeling that had taken up residence in his chest. Maisie noticed, of course. Kids always noticed. Are you mad at Ms. Hale? She asked on December 23rd, while they were stringing lights on their small Christmas tree. What? No, Bug. Why would you think that? Because you keep looking at your phone like you want to text her, but then you don't. And you've been all quiet and weird since I got sick. Caleb paused with a strand of lights in his hands. I'm not mad at her, I'm just thinking about some things. What things? How did you explain existential fear to an 8-year-old? How did you tell your daughter that the reason you were pulling away from someone who made you both happy was because you were terrified of being happy? Adult things, he said, which was a cop-out, and they both knew it. Maisie frowned, that little crease appearing between her eyebrows that was pure Rebecca. Ms. Hale is really nice, Daddy, and she makes you smile. You should text her. It's more complicated than that. Why? Because Caleb set down the lights and sat on the couch, patting the cushion beside him. Maisie climbed up, tucking herself against his side. Because sometimes when we care about people, it can hurt if something happens to them. And I'm trying to figure out if I'm ready to risk that kind of hurt again. Because of Mom? Yeah, because of Mom. Maisie was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she said, in a voice far too wise for her age, "But Mom would want us to be happy, right? That's what you said. That she wouldn't want us to stop living." Caleb felt his throat tighten. That's true. Then why are you stopping? Out of the mouths of babes. His 8-year-old daughter had just cut through all his complicated fears and rationalizations with one simple question. Why was he stopping? Why was he choosing fear over possibility? You're pretty smart, you know that? He managed. I know. Maisie grinned, then turned serious again. I like Miss Hale. She helped me when I was sad about my painting, and she was really nice when I got sick. I think she cares about us. I think she does too. So why can't we care about her back? Caleb didn't have a good answer to that. Or rather, he had too many answers, all of them rooted in fear rather than reason. I'll think about it, he promised. Now come on, let's finish this tree before bedtime. They worked together in companionable silence, Maisie chattering about her wish list for Santa, while Caleb's mind churned through everything she'd said. By the time the tree was lit and decorated, covered in mismatched ornaments and paper snowflakes Maisie had made at school, Caleb had almost convinced himself to reach out to Victoria. Almost. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Caleb had planned a quiet day, just him and Maisie, their traditional dinner of ham and scalloped potatoes, opening one present each before bed. Simple. Safe. Contained. But around noon, his phone rang with an unknown number. Hello? Mr. Foster? This is Principal Matthews. I apologize for calling on Christmas Eve, but I wanted to give you a heads up about something before you heard it through the grapevine. Caleb's stomach dropped. Is this about Maisie? No, nothing like that. It's about the Hale Foundation partnership. There's been a development. What kind of development? The foundation's board met last week, and they've offered Ms. Hale a significant promotion. She'd be overseeing all their education initiatives across the Midwest region, but it would require her to relocate to Chicago. She hasn't made her decision yet, but I wanted you to know in case Maisie hears about it from other students. There's been some talk among the staff. The words seemed to echo in Caleb's ears. Chicago, relocate, leaving. When would this happen? He heard himself ask. If she accepts, after the winter break ends. The new position starts in February. Caleb thanked Principal Matthews and hung up, the phone heavy in his hand. Victoria was leaving, or might be leaving, and she hadn't mentioned it. Not during any of their coffee meetings, not when she'd driven them to urgent care, not when she'd held his hand and told him to stop living in fear. She was going to disappear, just like he'd known she would eventually. Just like everyone did. The rational part of his brain tried to argue that this was a job opportunity, that Victoria's career didn't revolve around him and Maisie, that she had every right to make choices for herself. But the fear-driven part, the part that had been in control for 3 years, latched onto this as proof that he'd been right all along. Caring about people meant setting yourself up for loss. He made it through Christmas Eve on autopilot, dinner with Maisie, opening presents, reading her favorite Christmas story before bed. He smiled and laughed and played his role, but inside he was building walls again, reinforcing the barriers he'd let Victoria dismantle. It was safer this way, easier. Maisie fell asleep clutching the new sketchbook he'd given her, and Caleb sat alone in the living room staring at their Christmas tree. His phone sat on the coffee table, Victoria's number just a few taps away. He could call her,
could ask her about Chicago,
could have an actual conversation instead of jumping to conclusions.
but he didn't. Instead, he went to bed and spent the night staring at the ceiling, imagining all the ways this could end badly. Christmas Day brought a text from Victoria that Caleb almost didn't read. Merry Christmas. I hope you and Maisie are having a wonderful day. Thank you for being part of my journey back to living again. It's meant more than you know. The message felt like goodbye wrapped in holiday cheer.
Caleb typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on a simple, Merry Christmas to you too, cold, distant, safe. 3 days later, Maisie came home from a playdate at her friend Emma's house with tears streaming down her face. She ran past Caleb straight to her room, slamming the door behind her. Maisie? Bug, what's wrong? He knocked on her door, but she didn't answer, just the sound of muffled crying from inside. I'm coming in, okay? He opened the door to find Maisie face down on her bed, her whole body shaking with sobs. He sat beside her, rubbing her back in slow circles until the crying subsided enough for her to speak. Emma's mom said Ms. Hale is leaving, she finally choked out. She said she got a fancy job in Chicago and she's going away and we'll never see her again. Caleb's heart cracked. Oh, Bug, I don't want her to leave. Maisie sat up, her face blotchy and wet with tears. She's our friend. Why does she have to go? Why does everyone always leave? The question hit Caleb like a punch to the gut because it was exactly what he'd been thinking. But hearing it from his daughter's mouth, seeing the devastation on her face, suddenly made him see how toxic that mindset was. How much damage he'd done by teaching Maisie, intentionally or not, that caring about people meant inevitable loss. Sometimes people have to make choices about their careers and their lives, he said carefully. That doesn't mean they don't care about us. But she didn't even tell us. If she cared, she would have told us. Caleb couldn't argue with that logic because he'd been thinking the same thing. Maybe she was trying to figure out what to do first. Maybe she didn't want to upset you if she wasn't sure yet. Or maybe she doesn't care as much as we thought, Maisie said, and the cynicism in her 8-year-old voice was like a mirror held up to Caleb's own fears. Maybe we were just a project for her, like the arts program, something to fix and then move on from. That's not true, Maisie. Victoria cares about you very much. Then why is she leaving? Maisie's voice broke on the question. Why do people who care always leave? First Mom, now Ms. Hale. What if everyone I love just goes away? And there it was. The fear Caleb had been carrying for 3 years, now taking root in his daughter's heart because he'd modeled it for her. He'd taught her by example that love was temporary, that loss was inevitable, that the safest path was to keep your heart locked away. He pulled Maisie into his arms, feeling her hot tears soak through his shirt. I'm so sorry, Bug. I'm so sorry. For what? For teaching you to be afraid. For showing you that the way to deal with loss is to stop letting people in. Your mom didn't want that for you. She wanted you to live fully, to love deeply, to take risks even when they're scary. His own voice was thick with emotion now. And I've been doing the exact opposite. I've been teaching you to protect yourself instead of teaching you to be brave. Maisie pulled back to look at him. But you are brave, Daddy. You take care of me all by yourself. That's brave. No, Bug. That's just surviving. Being brave means being willing to get hurt. Being willing to care about people even when you know they might leave. Being willing to stay open even when every instinct tells you to close off. He wiped tears from her cheeks. I need to be braver. We both do. How? Caleb thought about Victoria's words at the coffee shop, about showing up and staying present and trusting that whatever happened, they'd find a way through it, about choosing possibility over fear. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I think the first step is talking to Ms. Hale, finding out what's really going on instead of assuming the worst. Will you do that? Yeah, I will. Promise? I promise. Maisie settled against him, her breathing gradually evening out. They sat together in the fading afternoon light, and Caleb made a decision. He'd spent 3 years running from pain, from connection, from anything that might require him to be vulnerable. And in the process, he'd built a prison for both himself and his daughter. It was time to break free. That evening, after Maisie was asleep, Caleb pulled out his phone and called Victoria. It rang 4 times, and he was preparing to leave a voicemail when she answered. Caleb, is everything okay? Is Maisie? She's fine. Well, no, she's not fine. She's upset. We need to talk. About? About Chicago. About the fact that you're apparently leaving and didn't think to mention it to the people who've come to care about you. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, can we do this in person? Please? When? Now? I know it's late, but I think this conversation needs to happen face to face. Caleb glanced toward Maisie's bedroom. Mrs. Chen was home next door. She'd come over if he needed her to sit with Maisie for an hour. Okay, where? My place. I'll text you the address. 20 minutes later, Caleb stood outside a luxury apartment building downtown, his breath forming clouds in the winter air. Victoria had texted the unit number, and he rode the elevator to the 8th floor with his heart hammering in his chest. She opened the door before he could knock, looking smaller somehow in casual clothes, leggings and an oversized sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. Behind her, he could see glimpses of her apartment, modern furniture, artwork on the walls, and boxes. Several boxes stacked near the door. You're packing, he said flatly. Come in, please. He stepped inside and she closed the door behind him. The apartment was beautiful but impersonal, like a hotel suite decorated by a professional. Nothing that spoke to who Victoria was beyond her professional success. Except for one thing. On her refrigerator, held by a magnet, was a child's drawing, one of Maisie's sunflowers. Victoria followed his gaze. She gave that to me after the art showcase, said she wanted me to have something to remember her by. And you put it on your refrigerator. It's the first thing I see every morning, the last thing I see before bed. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself. Caleb, I'm sorry. I should have told you about the Chicago offer. I didn't know how. How about, hey Caleb, I got offered a promotion and I might be moving away. Pretty straightforward. Is it? Because in my head, telling you meant acknowledging that what's happening between us matters. That leaving would hurt. And I've spent so long protecting myself from emotional entanglement that admitting I care felt like admitting defeat. So instead, you just decided to disappear? No, I haven't decided anything yet. The offer has been on the table for 3 weeks, and I keep putting off giving them an answer because... She stopped, turning away from him. Because what? Because somewhere along the way, keeping a promise to your dead wife turned into caring about you and your daughter. And then caring turned into something more. Something that scares the hell out of me because I don't do this, Caleb. I don't do messy emotions and complicated relationships and putting down roots. I do career advancement and professional achievement and things I can control. You think I don't understand that? Caleb moved closer, his voice rising. You think I don't know what it's like to protect yourself by staying distant? I've been doing it for 3 years, but at least I've been honest about it. At least I haven't been planning my exit strategy while pretending to care. I'm not pretending. Victoria spun to face him, and there were tears in her eyes. That's the problem. I care so much it terrifies me. When Maisie got sick, I was as scared as you were. When you pulled away after that, it hurt more than any career setback ever has. And when they offered me Chicago, my first thought wasn't about the salary or the prestige or the opportunity. It was about how much I'd miss you both if I left. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Then don't leave, Caleb said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't fair. Or leave. It's your life, your career, your choice. But don't make that choice based on fear. Don't run away because you're scared of caring. And don't lie to yourself that it's about what's best for your career when it's really about protecting yourself from getting hurt. That's rich coming from you, Victoria shot back. You're the one who pulled away the second things got too real. You're the one who's been looking for excuses to prove that everyone leaves eventually. Well, congratulations, Caleb. You were right. I might leave. And you can spend the rest of your life using that as proof that caring about people is pointless. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, you've been waiting for me to disappoint you since the day we met. Waiting for proof that trusting someone new was a mistake. And now you have it, so you can go back to your carefully controlled life without having to risk anything. The words struck home because they were true. Some part of Caleb had been waiting for exactly this, for proof that opening his heart again would only lead to more pain. But standing here, looking at Victoria with tears streaming down her face, and one of Maisie's sunflowers stuck to her refrigerator, he realized something crucial. The pain wasn't coming from her leaving. The pain was coming from not being brave enough to ask her to stay, not being willing to fight for something that mattered. "You're right," he said quietly.
"I've been waiting for you to leave, expecting it, maybe even pushing you toward it because it felt safer than admitting how much you've come to mean to us. To me." He took a breath, forcing himself to be as honest as she'd been. "But Maisie asked me something today that I couldn't answer. She asked why everyone she loves leaves, and I realized that I've been teaching her that. By example, by closing myself off, by being too afraid to fight for the people who matter. Caleb, I'm not asking you to give up your career for us. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your life for a ready-made family you stumbled into by accident. But I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about why you're considering Chicago. Is it really because it's the best move for your career, or is it because running away feels safer than staying and seeing what this could become?" Victoria sank onto her couch, covering her face with her hands. When she spoke, her voice was muffled. "I don't know anymore. A month ago, I would have jumped at this opportunity, but now—" She looked up at him, her expression devastated. "Now I have coffee shop routines and art showcases and a little girl who draws sunflowers. And I have you, and the thought of giving all that up makes me feel sick." "Then don't." "But what if I stay and it doesn't work out? What if I give up this opportunity and 6 months from now you decide you're not ready for this after all? What if Maisie gets attached and then something goes wrong and I end up hurting her anyway?" "What if you stay and it does work out?" Caleb countered. "What if 6 months from now we're actually happy? What if Maisie gets attached and nothing goes wrong and you become part of our family for real? You can what if yourself into paralysis, Victoria. Believe me, I've tried. But at some point you have to choose to take the risk." "How? How do you just decide to stop being afraid?" Caleb sat beside her on the couch, close but not touching. "You don't stop being afraid. You just decide that what you're afraid of losing is worth being afraid for. You decide that the possibility of happiness is worth the risk of pain." They sat in silence for a long moment, both of them processing everything that had been said. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I need time to figure out what I really want, to talk to the board about my options, to be sure I'm making this decision for the right reasons." It wasn't the answer Caleb wanted, but it was honest, and he had to respect that. "How much time?" "A week, maybe 2. The board needs an answer by mid-January." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, I need space to think without your beautiful, terrified eyes making me want to choose things I'm not sure I'm ready for." Despite everything, Caleb felt his mouth twitch. "My eyes are terrified?" "Perpetually. It's simultaneously endearing and infuriating." He stood, knowing that staying longer would only make this harder. "For what it's worth, I hope you stay. Not for me, but for you. Because I think Chicago is just another version of the prison you built in Boston. And I think you've worked too hard at learning to live again to go back to just existing." Victoria walked him to the door, and they stood in the threshold, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "Caleb, thank you for being honest, for calling me on my bullshit, for—" She gestured helplessly. "For everything. Thank you for keeping your promise to Rebecca, for helping us find our way back to living, for caring, even though it scared you." He left before the moment could stretch into something more complicated, riding the elevator down with the image of Maisie's sunflower on Victoria's refrigerator burned into his mind. The next week and a half were some of the longest of Caleb's life. He didn't hear from Victoria, no texts, no calls, no chance encounters at coffee shops or school events. The silence felt deliberate, and he respected it even though it gnawed at him. Maisie asked about her every day. "Did Ms. Hale decide yet? Is she staying?" "I don't know, Bug. She's still thinking about it." "I made her a card in case she decides to stay. Do you think she'd like it?" The card was covered in sunflowers with "Please stay" written in Maisie's careful printing across the front. Looking at it made Caleb's chest ache. "I think she'd love it," he said. "But Maisie, we need to prepare ourselves for the possibility that she might choose Chicago. And if she does, it doesn't mean she doesn't care about us. It just means she's making the choice that's right for her life, okay?" Maisie's lower lip trembled, but she nodded. "Okay, but I still hope she stays." "Me too, Bug. Me too." January 14th arrived with freezing rain and gray skies. Caleb spent the day at the construction site trying to focus on work while his mind churned through worst-case scenarios. Victoria's deadline was approaching. Mid-January, she'd said. Any day now, he'd get word that she'd accepted the Chicago position and was leaving their lives as quickly as she'd entered them. He picked Maisie up from school at the regular time, and they drove home through the icy streets in silence. When they pulled into the driveway, Maisie pointed to the front porch. "Daddy, someone left something for us." A figure stood on their porch, and Caleb's heart stuttered when he recognized Victoria's silhouette through the freezing rain. She was soaked, her coat dark with water, her hair plastered to her head. She must have been standing there for a while. "Ms. Hale!" Maisie was out of the truck before Caleb could stop her, running through the rain to the porch. Caleb followed more slowly, his pulse pounding in his ears. Victoria looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days, but there was something different in her eyes, something that looked like resolve. "I turned them down," she said without preamble. "Chicago. I told them no." Maisie's squeal of joy was so loud it probably woke the neighbors. She threw her arms around Victoria's waist, and Victoria hugged her back, both of them getting soaked by the rain. Caleb just stood there, frozen, trying to process what he'd heard. "You turned them down," he repeated. "I turned them down." Victoria met his eyes over Maisie's head. "Because you were right. Chicago was just another way to run away. Another excuse to avoid putting down roots and taking risks and admitting that I care about people. And I'm done running." "You're staying?" "If you'll have me. Not as the foundation CEO who swoops in to fix things. Not as the keeper of your wife's final message. Just as me. Someone who cares about you and Maisie. Someone who wants to see where this goes without an exit strategy planned." Maisie looked up at her father, eyes shining with hope and barely contained excitement. "Daddy? Can she stay?" Caleb looked at Victoria, drenched and vulnerable and choosing them despite every self-protective instinct telling her to run. And he thought about Rebecca's final message, about letting light back in, about the promise he'd made to really live instead of just survive. "Yeah, Bug," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She can stay." Maisie dragged Victoria inside before either adult could say another word, chattering a mile a minute about the card she'd made and how happy she was. And could Ms. Hale please stay for dinner because they were having spaghetti, and it was really good spaghetti, the kind with the sauce from a jar, but Daddy added extra spices so it tasted homemade. Caleb stood in the doorway watching this whirlwind of 8-year-old enthusiasm, his heart doing complicated things in his chest. Victoria was soaked through, shivering slightly, mascara smudged under her eyes from rain or tears or both. She looked nothing like the composed CEO he'd met in the grocery store months ago. She looked real, human, beautifully imperfect. "You're dripping all over my floor," he said, though there was no reproach in his voice. "Sorry, I didn't exactly plan the dramatic rain-soaked confession." Victoria pushed wet hair out of her face. "In my head, this was much more composed. I like this version better, more honest." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement of what they'd both just risked, what they'd both chosen despite the fear. "Daddy, can I show Ms. Hale my room? I want to show her all my new drawings." Maisie was already tugging on Victoria's hand. "Maybe let her dry off first, Bug. And it's just Victoria. You don't have to call her Ms. Hale anymore if she's going to be around more often." Maisie's eyes went wide. "Really? I can just call you Victoria?" "If that's okay with you," Victoria said, crouching to Maisie's level. "Or you can call me whatever feels comfortable." "What about Vicky? Can I call you Vicky?" Victoria's smile was soft. "No one's called me Vicky since my sister died. I'd like that very much." "Vicky it is," Maisie beamed, then noticed Victoria was still shivering. "You should borrow some of Daddy's clothes. You're all wet and cold." Caleb caught Victoria's amused expression. "I have sweats and a hoodie that might fit. They'll be huge on you, but at least they're dry." "That sounds perfect." 20 minutes later, Victoria emerged from the bathroom wearing Caleb's old college hoodie and a pair of sweatpants she'd had to roll up 3 times. Her wet clothes were hanging over the shower rod. Her hair was wrapped in a towel, and she looked simultaneously ridiculous and endearing. "I look like I'm drowning in fabric," she observed. "You look warm," Caleb countered. "That's what matters." Maisie had already set an extra place at the kitchen table, and she insisted Victoria sit between her and Caleb for dinner.
The spaghetti was indeed from a jar with extra spices, and they ate while Maisie dominated the conversation, telling Victoria about everything she'd missed in the past week and a half. A new art project at school, a book she'd read, the fact that Mrs. Chen's cat had caught a mouse. Caleb watched Victoria engage with his daughter's chatter, asking questions and laughing at Maisie's stories, and felt something settle in his chest. This was what Rebecca had wanted, not for him to replace her, but for their home to be filled with warmth and conversation and the kind of casual intimacy that came from people who cared about each other. After dinner, Maisie finally got her wish to show Victoria her room. Caleb cleaned up the kitchen, listening to their voices drift from down the hallway. Maisie's excited explanations, Victoria's genuine interest and praise. When he finished the dishes, he found them sitting on Maisie's floor surrounded by drawings, Victoria examining each one with the attention she might give a corporate presentation. "This one is my favorite," Maisie was saying, holding up the watercolor from the mentorship program. "Memory of Mom's park. You said it was perfect even though it was messy." "I meant that," Victoria said. "Sometimes the messy things are the most beautiful because they're honest." Maisie considered this, then pulled out another drawing, the card she'd made. "I made this for you, in case you stayed." Victoria took the card carefully, studying the sunflowers Maisie had drawn around the words, "Please stay." Her eyes went bright with unshed tears. "It's beautiful, Maisie. Thank you." "Oh, so you're really staying in town? You're not going to Chicago?" "I'm really staying. I like it here too much to leave." "Because of us?" Maisie asked with the directness only children could manage. Victoria glanced at Caleb, who was leaning against the doorframe watching this exchange. "Yes, because of you, both of you, and because I'm tired of running away from good things just because they might be hard." Maisie threw her arms around Victoria's neck, and Caleb saw Victoria's face crumple slightly before she composed herself, hugging Maisie back with gentle fierceness. "Okay, Bug," Caleb said after a moment. "It's getting late. Time for pajamas and teeth brushing." Maisie groaned but complied, gathering her drawings and bouncing toward the bathroom. Victoria stood, brushing off her borrowed sweatpants. "She's wonderful," she said quietly. "You've raised an incredible kid, Caleb. We've had help recently." They moved back to the living room, the house feeling different with Victoria in it. Fuller, warmer, more like a home than it had in years. Caleb found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she looked in his clothes, the fact that she'd chosen them over a prestigious career opportunity. "Can I ask you something?" he said as they settled on opposite ends of the couch. "Anything." "What made you decide? Really decide, I mean. Was it something I said, or—" "It was something Maisie said, actually." Victoria pulled the towel off her hair, running her fingers through the damp strands. "Or rather, something I remembered she'd said. At the art showcase, when she was upset about her painting being imperfect, she asked if it was okay for things to be messy. And I told her that sometimes messy is honest. Sometimes it's real. I remember. Well, I realized I'd been spending my entire adult life trying to create the perfect image, perfect career, perfect apartment, perfect control over my emotions. And none of it was honest. None of it was real. It was just me building walls and calling it success." She met his eyes. "You and Maisie are messy. This whole situation is messy. But it's the most real thing I've felt in 20 years. And I decided that was worth more than any promotion." Caleb felt his throat tighten. "That's a hell of a sacrifice." "It's not a sacrifice if I'm gaining something better. Besides, the foundation still needs someone to run the local education initiatives. I negotiated to keep my current position with a salary increase and more autonomy. Turns out I'm very good at leveraging job offers into better terms." "So you're still the CEO?" "Of the regional division, yes. Just not the entire Midwest. I'll have a life outside of 80-hour work weeks. Time for coffee shops and art showcases, and—" She trailed off, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "And dinner with me and Maisie?" Caleb supplied. "If the invitation stands." "It stands, though I should warn you, we're pretty boring. Routine is kind of our thing. I could use some boring. I've had enough chaos to last a lifetime." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them processing the enormity of what had just happened. Then Maisie appeared in her pajamas, smelling like toothpaste and strawberry shampoo. "Can Vicky read me a story?" she asked, climbing onto the couch between them. "If Vicky wants to," Caleb said, glancing at Victoria. "I'd love to."
So they all ended up in Maisie's room. Maisie in bed, Victoria sitting on one side and Caleb on the other, reading from the same book about a girl who could talk to animals.
Maisie's eyes grew heavy halfway through the second chapter, and by the third she was fast asleep. Caleb carefully extracted himself from the bed, gesturing for Victoria to follow. They turned off the light and closed the door partially, leaving it cracked the way Maisie liked. Back in the living room, the weight of everything unsaid hung between them. "I should go," Victoria said, though she didn't move toward the door. "Let you get some rest. It's been a long day. Your clothes are still wet. I'll take them with me, change when I get home. Or you could wait until they're dry. I could throw them in the dryer." Victoria studied him, trying to read what he was really asking. "Caleb, if I stay longer, we need to talk about what this means, about what we're doing here." "I know. Because I need to understand what you want. Not what you think you should want, or what would make Maisie happy, or what you think Rebecca would have wanted. What do you actually want?" It was a fair question, one Caleb had been avoiding asking himself because the answer terrified him. "I want to stop being afraid," he said finally. "I want to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. I want to believe that good things can last, that people can stay, that opening my heart again won't destroy me if something goes wrong." "That's what you want to want. What do you actually want right now in this moment?" Caleb looked at Victoria. Brilliant, stubborn, beautiful Victoria, who'd kept a promise to his dead wife for 3 years, who'd turned down her dream job to stay in a town that held painful memories, who'd sat on his porch in freezing rain, waiting for him to come home. "You," he said simply. "I want you. In my life, in Maisie's life, in whatever messy, imperfect way that looks like. I want coffee shop mornings and art showcases and someone who calls me on my bullshit when I'm being too careful. I want to see where this goes without sabotaging it because I'm scared." Victoria's eyes were suspiciously bright. "That's a good start. But you need to know something. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to be too busy with work, or too closed off emotionally, or too focused on fixing things instead of just being present. I'm not some perfect savior who's going to heal all your wounds. I'm just a person trying to figure out how to live again, same as you." "I know. And I'm going to be too protective, too cautious, too stuck in routines because they feel safe. I'm going to panic when Maisie gets sick, or when you're 5 minutes late, or when anything threatens the careful balance I've built. I'm a work in progress, Victoria. A messy one. Good. I don't want perfect. I just want honest." They moved toward each other without consciously deciding to, meeting in the middle of the living room. Caleb reached up to tuck a strand of damp hair behind Victoria's ear, his hand lingering against her cheek. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Me too. But I'm also happy. For the first time in 3 years, I'm actually happy." "Me too," Victoria whispered. He kissed her then, soft and tentative and full of promise. It lasted only a moment before they both pulled back, but it felt like crossing a threshold, like choosing possibility over fear. "I should really go," Victoria said, though her hand was still resting against his chest, "before this gets too complicated for one evening. Your clothes are still wet. They'll survive. So will I." She smiled. "But I'll be back. If that's okay. More than okay. Come to dinner tomorrow? Maisie would love it. I would love it. Tomorrow's Saturday. Don't you have your grocery shopping routine?" "Maybe it's time to change up the routine a little." Victoria laughed, kissing him once more, brief and sweet, before gathering her damp clothes from the bathroom and heading to the door. She looked absurd in his oversized hoodie and rolled-up sweatpants, her hair still damp and wild, mascara still smudged under her eyes. She'd never looked more beautiful. "Caleb?" she said from the doorway. "Yeah?" "Thank you for being brave enough to ask me to stay, for fighting for this even when it scared you. Thank you for staying, for seeing something in us worth taking a risk on." She left with a smile, and Caleb stood at the door long after her car had disappeared down the street, feeling lighter than he had in years. The next morning, Maisie woke him at 7 with jumping on his bed and squealing about how Vicky was staying and could they invite her to breakfast and maybe they could all go to the art store together because Mrs. Patterson had given her a list of new supplies she might need for the spring semester. Caleb let himself be dragged into this enthusiastic chaos,
texting Victoria an invitation to join them for pancakes. Her response was immediate. "I'll bring real maple syrup, the good stuff."
She arrived at 9 with expensive syrup and a bag of fresh blueberries, looking more like herself in jeans and a sweater, but still softer than the CEO he'd first met. Maisie attached herself to Victoria's side immediately, chattering while Caleb made pancakes and coffee. It felt domestic, normal, like something they'd been doing for years instead of hours. They ate breakfast together, arguing playfully about whether blueberries belonged in pancakes or on the side. Afterward, they all went to Morrison Art Supply, where Maisie picked out new sketchbooks and charcoal pencils, while Caleb and Victoria trailed behind her. "She's in heaven," Victoria observed, watching Maisie examine different paperweights with intense concentration. "She gets that focus from her mother." Rebecca could spend hours in bookstores just touching different books, reading first lines. "You talk about her more easily now, Rebecca." "Yeah, turns out talking about the people we've lost doesn't make us miss them more. It just makes them feel less far away." Caleb glanced at Victoria. "Someone very wise taught me that." "Sounds like a smart person." "Kind of pushy, but not wrong." They were smiling at each other like fools when Maisie returned with her arms full of supplies. Caleb didn't even check the total before paying, just handed over his card and watched his daughter glow with excitement. This was what Rebecca had wanted. This fullness, this joy, this life beyond mere survival. The weeks that followed settled into a new kind of routine. Victoria came to dinner twice a week, sometimes more. She and Maisie developed their own relationship, art gallery visits on Saturday afternoons, conversations about color theory and famous painters, an easy rapport that didn't feel forced or artificial. She was careful never to overstep, never to try replacing Rebecca, just to be herself, present and engaged and genuinely interested in Maisie's world. And slowly, carefully, Caleb and Victoria built something of their own. Coffee dates that turned into long conversations about their childhoods, their fears, their dreams. Stolen kisses in his kitchen after Maisie went to bed, hands held under the table during dinner. The gradual intertwining of two lives that had both been frozen in grief. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when Caleb's old fears resurfaced, when he pulled back or got too quiet, retreating into his protective shell. There were times when Victoria threw herself into work too deeply, using professional demands as an excuse to avoid emotional vulnerability. But they learned to recognize these patterns, to call each other out gently, to keep choosing courage over comfort. February brought Maisie's 9th birthday, and Victoria helped Caleb plan a party at the Community Arts Center, a painting party where Maisie and her friends could create their own masterpieces. Watching Maisie laugh with her friends, covered in paint and radiating happiness, Caleb felt something shift permanently in his chest. This was healing, not forgetting Rebecca, but learning to hold her memory while still moving forward, learning that the heart was big enough for both grief and joy, both past love and present possibilities. "She looks so much like her mother when she laughs like that," Victoria said softly beside him. "She does." Rebecca would have loved this, loved seeing Maisie so happy and creative and free. "I think she would have loved seeing you happy too." Caleb looked at Victoria, this woman who'd kept a promise, who'd pushed him toward healing, who'd chosen them over career advancement and self-protection. "Yeah," he agreed. "I think she would." That evening, after the party guests had left and Maisie was in bed surrounded by new art supplies and birthday presents, Caleb and Victoria sat on his couch drinking wine and talking quietly. "Can I show you something?" Caleb asked. "Of course." He retrieved a box from his bedroom closet, one he hadn't opened in 3 years. Inside were photos, letters, small mementos from his life with Rebecca. He'd packed it all away after she died, unable to look at it without falling apart. Now he spread it on the coffee table between them, and Victoria looked at each item with respectful attention. Photos of Rebecca pregnant, laughing, holding newborn Maisie. A love letter she'd written him when they were dating. A dried flower from their wedding bouquet. The detritus of a life lived and lost. "She was beautiful," Victoria said, studying a photo of Rebecca in their backyard, sunflowers blooming behind her. "She was, inside and out, and I spent 3 years terrified that remembering her would hurt too much. But you taught me that remembering is how we keep people alive, how we honor them. I didn't teach you that. You figured it out yourself."
You opened the door, made it safe to try.
Caleb picked up one of the letters, Rebecca's handwriting familiar and achingly distant.
I want to put these back out, not hidden away. I want Maisie to see them, to know her mother wasn't just someone who died, but someone who lived fully. I think that's beautiful. And I want you to know that you're not competing with her memory. You're not a replacement. You're something new, something Rebecca would have wanted for us, I think. Someone who helped us find our way back to life.
Victoria's eyes filled with tears. That's all I ever wanted to be. Not a substitute, just someone who helped. You're more than that now. You know that, right? What am I? Caleb considered the question, thought about the past months, the slow building of trust and affection, and something deeper than either. You're part of our family, if you want to be.
I want to be, Victoria whispered. More than I've wanted anything in a very long time.
They sat together, surrounded by memories of Rebecca, and it felt right. Not like betrayal, but like continuity, like honoring the past while embracing the future. Spring came early that year, bringing warming temperatures and the first hints of green to the winter-brown landscape. Caleb stood in his backyard one Saturday morning, Victoria beside him, while Maisie ran around the yard with a measuring tape and a notepad. "What exactly is she doing?" Victoria asked. "Planting a garden?" She announced at breakfast that we need to grow our own sunflowers this year. Apparently buying them at the store isn't the same as watching them grow. Smart kid. She gets that from her mother, too. They watched Maisie work with intense concentration, marking spots where she thought sunflowers should go. The yard was still mostly dead grass and bare dirt, but Maisie saw it as a canvas for something beautiful. "We'll need to prepare the soil," Caleb observed. "Buy seeds. Actually learn how to garden since I've never grown anything in my life. I helped my sister with a garden once, before she died. I think I remember the basics." "Of course you do. Is there anything you're not good at?" "Emotional vulnerability, not being a control freak, admitting when I'm wrong." Victoria ticked off on her fingers, grinning. "Should I continue?" "Maybe later." Maisie ran over, her notepad filled with sketches and measurements. "I've got it all figured out. We'll plant sunflowers here and a whole row along the back fence. And maybe some vegetables too?" "Mrs. Patterson said tomatoes are easy to grow." "Ambitious," Caleb said. "But I like it. We'll need help, though. Neither Vicky nor I know much about gardening." "We can learn together. That's what Mom would have said. She always said the best adventures were the ones where you didn't know what you were doing." Victoria caught Caleb's eye, both of them recognizing Rebecca's philosophy and Maisie's words. Not perfect control, but brave experimentation. Not protection from failure, but willingness to try. "Then let's do it," Caleb said. "Operation Sunflower Garden is officially underway." They spent the rest of the morning planning, researching on their phones, making lists of supplies they'd need. It felt good to have a project, something they could build together, something that would bloom and grow and require care, but would reward them with beauty. That afternoon, while Maisie napped after lunch, rare for a 9-year-old, but she'd been up since dawn with excitement, Caleb and Victoria sat on his back porch with coffee. "I've been thinking," Victoria said carefully, "about the future, about what we're building here." Caleb's stomach tightened slightly, old reflexes that still kicked in when conversations got serious. But he pushed through the anxiety. "What about it?" "I don't want to rush anything. We're still figuring this out and Maisie needs stability. But I want you to know that I'm all in. This isn't casual for me. You and Maisie, this life we're building, it matters. It's what I want." Even with all the complications, the grief and the fear and the single dad baggage, especially with all that, because it's real, it's honest. And I'm tired of living a life that looks perfect from the outside but feels empty on the inside. Caleb set down his coffee and took her hand. "I'm all in too. Scared out of my mind sometimes, but all in. And I think Rebecca would be happy about this. About us." "You think?" "I know. Because she made you promise to make sure Maisie and I wouldn't be alone. She wanted us to find our way back to life. And you've helped us do that. More than helped. You've become part of that life. Part of what makes it worth living." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two people learning how to live again, fumbling our way through it together. Best kind of pair, if you ask me. The messy, honest kind." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the backyard where Maisie had planned her garden. In a few weeks, they'd break ground, plant seeds, begin the process of growing something new. And in the meantime, they'd keep doing what they'd been doing, showing up, being present, choosing courage over comfort. The sound of Maisie's bedroom window opening made them both look up. She leaned out, still sleepy-eyed but grinning. "Are you guys being mushy down there?" "Maybe a little," Caleb admitted. "Good. Mom would have liked that." Maisie disappeared back inside, and they heard her humming to herself, some song from the musical Rebecca had loved. Victoria laughed softly. "She's going to be insufferable about this, isn't she, playing matchmaker?" "Absolutely. We'll never hear the end of it." "Worth it, though. Definitely worth it." May arrived with warm sunshine and the first real growth in Maisie's garden. The sunflowers were still small, just green shoots pushing through the soil, but they were alive and growing. Maisie checked them every morning before school, measuring their progress with a ruler and documenting everything in a journal Victoria had given her. "They're getting taller," she announced one morning at breakfast. "A whole inch since Monday."
That's how growth works, Bug. Slow and steady. "Like us," Maisie said wisely, "getting better a little bit at a time." Caleb and Victoria exchanged glances across the table. When had his 9-year-old become so perceptive? That weekend, they had their first official family outing, a trip to the art museum in the city, 2 hours away. Maisie wanted to see the Van Gogh exhibit, and Victoria had secured tickets weeks in advance. They made a day of it. Museum in the morning, lunch at a restaurant Maisie picked because it had crayons and paper placemats for drawing, ice cream afterward while walking through a nearby park. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, just a family spending time together, but also proof of how far they'd come. Standing in front of Van Gogh's Sunflowers, the real painting, not a reproduction, Maisie was so quiet that Caleb worried something was wrong. "You okay, Bug?" "It's perfect," she whispered. "Mom would have loved this so much." "She would have. She did, actually. We saw this exact painting at a different museum years before you were born." "Really?" "Really." She stood in front of it for so long that the security guard started to get suspicious. Said something about how Van Gogh painted his pain and his joy all mixed together, and that's what made it beautiful. Maisie looked up at him with those solemn brown eyes. "Do you think that's why I like sunflowers? Because they have pain and joy mixed together? Because they remind me of Mom, and that's sad but also happy?" Caleb's throat tightened. "Yeah, Bug. I think that's exactly why." Victoria stood slightly apart, giving them this moment, but Maisie reached out and grabbed her hand, pulling her closer. "You should see it too, Vicky. You're part of this now." And Victoria did, standing between Caleb and Maisie, all three of them looking at a painting that represented loss and beauty and the complicated truth that sometimes the most painful things in life were also the most achingly beautiful. The drive home was quiet, Maisie asleep in the back seat while Caleb navigated the highway, and Victoria sat beside him. "Today was perfect," she said softly. "It was. Thank you for arranging it. Thank you for letting me be part of it, for letting me be part of your family. You're not just part of anymore, you're essential. You know that, right?" Victoria reached over and took his hand. "I'm starting to believe it." Summer brought the sunflowers to full height, towering stalks with enormous yellow blooms that turned their faces toward the sun. Maisie's garden had become the neighborhood sensation, with Mrs. Chen and other neighbors stopping by to admire the flowers. "Your mother would be so proud," Mrs. Chen told Maisie one afternoon. "She always loved sunflowers." "I know," Maisie said happily. "That's why I planted them, so I could remember her but also make new memories. Vicky helped me design the garden layout." Mrs. Chen gave Victoria an approving smile. "You're good for this family. I can see it in how they've changed, happier, more alive." That evening, after Maisie went to bed, Caleb found Victoria sitting in the backyard among the sunflowers, her face tilted up to catch the last rays of sunset. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, sitting beside her. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in less than a year. This time last year, I was in Boston working 80-hour weeks and coming home to an empty apartment. I was successful and miserable and convinced that was just how life was supposed to be. And now? Now I'm sitting in a garden surrounded by flowers planted by a 9-year-old,
in a town I swore I'd never return to, with a family I didn't know I was looking for. She turned to him, her eyes bright. Now I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy, and it terrifies me how much I have to lose. Welcome to the club. I've been terrified for months. How do you deal with it? Caleb thought about Rebecca's final message, about the promise he'd made and broken and finally learned to keep. I remind myself that being afraid of loss means I have something worth losing, and I try to focus on being present instead of worrying about the future. Some days are better than others. That's very wise. I have a good teacher. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have made Maisie reach for her paints. The sunflowers swayed gently in the evening breeze, and Caleb felt a peace he'd never expected to find again. I love you, Victoria said suddenly. I know we haven't said it yet, and maybe it's too soon, but I need you to know. I love you, and I love Maisie, and I love this messy, imperfect life we're building together. Caleb turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. I love you too. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. And now? Now I'm choosing to be brave, to believe that good things can last, to trust that you're not going anywhere. I'm not, Victoria promised. I'm staying right here, for as long as you'll have me. He kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise. Around them, the sunflowers stood tall, their faces turned toward the fading light, testament to growth and resilience and the truth that even after the darkest winters, beautiful things could bloom again. The next morning, Caleb woke to find Maisie already up, sitting at the kitchen table with paper and crayons spread everywhere. She was drawing with intense concentration, her tongue sticking out slightly the way it always did when she was focused. Morning, Bug. What are you working on? She looked up with a grin. A present for Vicky, for being part of our family. Caleb looked at the drawing taking shape, their house, the garden, 3 figures standing together among the sunflowers. Him, Maisie, and Victoria all holding hands. In the sky above them, rendered in careful detail, was another figure, a woman with Rebecca's smile, surrounded by sunflowers, looking down on them with love. That's beautiful, Maisie. Do you think Mom would like it, that Vicky's with us now? Caleb sat down beside his daughter, pulling her into a hug. I think Mom would love it. I think she'd be so happy to see us living again, really living, not just going through the motions. And I think she'd be grateful to Vicky for helping us figure out how to do that. Me too. Maisie went back to her drawing, adding final touches, grass, clouds, tiny details that made it uniquely hers. When she finished, she held it up proudly. Can we give it to her today? How about we do something even better? How about we ask Vicky to come over tonight, and we can all have a special dinner together? We can give her the drawing and maybe make it official that she's part of our family now. Like really official. Like she can come to all our family stuff and we can count her when we say how many people are in our family. Exactly like that. Maisie's squeal of delight was loud enough to wake the neighbors. She threw her arms around Caleb's neck, nearly knocking him off his chair. This is the best day ever. Can I call her? Can I tell her? Let me text her first. Make sure she's free tonight. Caleb pulled out his phone and typed, Any chance you're free for dinner tonight? Maisie has something she wants to give you. Something important. Victoria's response was immediate. I'd cancel anything for you two. What time? 6? I'm making something special. Can't wait. Love you. Love you too. That afternoon, Caleb threw himself into cooking. Nothing fancy, but Rebecca's recipe for chicken pot pie that he'd been too afraid to make for 3 years. It felt right to cook it tonight, to bring one of Rebecca's traditions into this new chapter they were writing. Maisie helped, rolling out dough and arranging vegetables, chattering nonstop about what she wanted to say to Victoria. Caleb let her talk, offering guidance, but mostly just enjoying this moment of domestic happiness. Victoria arrived at 6 on the dot, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, of course, and wearing a sundress that made Caleb's heart do complicated things. Something smells amazing, she said, kissing Caleb in greeting before turning to Maisie. And you look very serious, kiddo. What's this important thing you wanted to give me? After dinner, Maisie announced. It has to be after dinner because that's when we do important family stuff. They ate together, the conversation flowing easily between topics. Maisie's upcoming school year, the Foundation's fall programming, plans for the garden as it transitioned into autumn. It felt natural, comfortable, like something they'd been doing forever instead of months. After dinner, Maisie retrieved her drawing from her room, holding it carefully as she presented it to Victoria. "I made this for you, because you're part of our family now, if you want to be." Victoria took the drawing, her eyes scanning the image. The three figures among the sunflowers, Rebecca watching from above with love. Her hand went to her mouth, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Maisie, I don't even have words. It's perfect." "So you want to be part of our family? Officially?" "More than anything in the world." Maisie launched herself at Victoria, hugging her tight. Over his daughter's head, Victoria met Caleb's eyes, and the love and gratitude in her expression made his own eyes sting. "There's one more thing," Caleb said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box. Nothing fancy, just something he'd picked up that afternoon at an antique store downtown. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with 3 charms: a sunflower, a paintbrush, and a small heart. "This isn't an engagement ring or anything," he said quickly, suddenly nervous. "I know we're not there yet, and I don't want to rush things. But I wanted you to have something that represents what you mean to us. The sunflower for Rebecca and the promise you kept. The paintbrush for Maisie and how you've helped her find her voice through art. And the heart for us. For this family we're building together." Victoria stared at the bracelet, then at him, then back at the bracelet. "Caleb, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep wearing it, as a reminder that you belong here, with us." "Always," Victoria whispered. "I'll wear it always." Maisie helped fasten it around Victoria's wrist, and they all stood there in Caleb's kitchen, the 3 of them, surrounded by the remnants of dinner and the warmth of home. And for the first time in 3 years, Caleb felt completely whole. Not because Victoria had filled the hole Rebecca left. That hole would always be there, a testament to love lost. But because he'd learned to hold both the grief and the joy simultaneously, to honor the past while embracing the future, to understand that the heart was vast enough for all of it. That night, after Victoria had gone home and Maisie was tucked into bed, Caleb stood in his backyard among the sunflowers. They were beginning to droop now as summer faded toward fall, their blooms heavy with seeds that would scatter and grow new flowers next year. Continuous growth, endless cycles of life and death and rebirth. He thought about Rebecca, about the promise he'd made and finally learned to keep. About Victoria, who delivered that message and stayed to help them honor it. About Maisie, who taught both adults that healing was possible if you were brave enough to try. "I hope you can see this, Beck," he said softly to the night air. "I hope you know we're okay, better than okay. We're living again, really living, just like you wanted, and we're carrying you with us every step of the way." A breeze rustled through the garden, making the sunflowers sway and dance. It felt like an answer, like blessing, like Rebecca's love, still present even in absence. Caleb went inside, locking the door behind him, and climbed into bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new moments of both joy and fear. But tonight, he let himself simply rest in the knowledge that they were going to be okay. All of them, the living and the dead, the ones who stayed and the ones who left, bound together by love that transcended loss. And in the morning, the sunflowers would turn their faces toward the light, and life would continue its beautiful, messy, imperfect march forward. Just as it should, just as Rebecca had wanted, just as they'd finally learned to let it.